Good afternoon, and welcome to the February Delta Stewardship Council meeting. I'm Randy Fiorini, the chairman of the Delta Stewardship Council. I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome all of those of you who are here in the audience. For those of you who are tuning on to the web, just a heads up, we are attempting to stream live the video, and so far I believe it's working. It may be intermittent, but you will not lose the audio if you're following along. So with that, I'd like to begin with the roll call, starting on the far right.
Eisenberg here.
Fiorini here.
PFO here.
We have 4. That gives us a quorum, and I believe Council Member Tatayan will be here in just a few moments. The first file item number 3, is the adoption of the January 29th, 2015 meeting. What's the council's pleasure?
Second.
PFO motion, Johnston seconds. Any comments? All right, we'll take the vote, starting with Patrick.
Eisenberg, aye.
Fiorini, aye.
PFO aye.
Motion passes. Item number 4, the chair's report. I just wanted to highlight the morning's activities. We toured the Consumnes River Preserve, had a wonderful presentation from the Nature Conservancy about the work that has gone on the Consumnes River, the plans for McCormick-Williamson and perhaps Staten Island in the Eastern Arc. Very informative, very instructive. We then went on to the town of Locke and visited the Locke Museum and had lunch at the world famous Juicy's. So we have had a Delta experience this morning, and we look forward to continuing that with the council meeting this afternoon. Now on to file item number 5, the executive officer's report, our Chief Deputy Dan Ray.
Am I on? Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, it was a great tour, you know, and we heard from Eric Fink of the Delta Protection Commission too, how the Amgen, the Tour of America, California is coming maybe along much the same route, and we could see from our trip today that they're going to really get a great introduction to all the unique things of this region. They'll probably see a couple signs about 2 tunnels too, I think, but if all publicity is good publicity, the tour is going to be good for the Delta and for understanding of our region. You know, we talk a lot every month about the co-equal goals, you know, a more reliable water supply and a healthy Delta ecosystem, and how difficult it is to find the right balance among those goals. And of course, our drought's making that a lot more difficult. The legislature said when they passed the Reform Act back in 2009 that the Delta's in a crisis, and the droughts helped the news media and our neighbors and fellow citizens understand the kind of crisis that our science programs by the numbers report, the performance measures they report each month, has been documenting for the past couple of years. And I was reminded of this by the response to the actions that were taken the last couple of months by the fish agencies and the water board as they're trying to respond to the drought situation. As you probably read, the executive director of the board, in response to requests from the CVP and the state water projects operators, approved variances from the usual Delta water quality standards. And his actions will allow the state and federal water projects to conserve water supplies and upstream reservoirs and more effectively operate their facilities in response to ongoing dry conditions. But those actions are going to come at a cost. More water for fish later in the year could mean less water for farmers and urban users, or more water for the users might mean less water for the fish. You know, at the board's hearing last week, Dr. Howard said he had been just wrong last year when he concluded that temporarily changing the rules to keep more water in reservoirs wouldn't cause unreasonable harm to the environment. And that took a lot of courage, I thought, but at the heart of adaptive management that the Reform Act calls for is a willingness to act and then learn from our actions, you know, so, and adjust. And is a similar example of courage I talked about last month when the fish agencies adjusted the way that they account for fish entrained at the pumps because the independent science review that the council's science program hosted had concluded that new approaches to counting fish were scientifically as justifiable as the old methods. This year, although Director Howard approved many of the same emergency changes that he had last year, his experience last year led him to turn down a request by the water agencies to also increase exports from the South Delta under certain conditions. He did approve elements of the petition to adjust flows and water quality requirements that govern inflows and outflows of the Delta and the operation of the cross-channel gates over the next couple of months. And these requirements, which had been in place for almost 20 years, help control salinity in the Delta and protect fish and wildlife and water quality for water users. Specifically, his order is going to allow the cross-channel gates that we saw today as we were driving into town, and I noticed were closed. They can be opened sometimes too during the next 2 months in order to reduce the salinity intrusion that could occur if less water gets released into the interior delta from upstream reservoirs. Typically, the gates had remained closed this time of year to help fish pass safely through the delta and out to the ocean rather than straying into the central delta. And this is like a tough decision because while opening the gates allows high-quality fresh water to get into the delta and protect against saltwater intrusion and reduces the need to release water from upstream reservoirs, it can also cause real problems for a migrating winter run. Salmon, as I mentioned last month, the last of that run is being released from hatcheries by the Fish and Wildlife Service to take advantage of the storm flows we were enjoying at that time. So I think it's just an example of the difficult decisions that folks are having to make. Critics on every side are quick to jump on these decisions, and some people characterize the water projects as killing the last wild populations of winter salmon, and water users complain that environmental rules are wasting water without benefits. And we've got farmers and farm workers showing up at the water board's hearings saying that they shouldn't put fish ahead of people. And then yesterday, the San Jose Mercury News editorialized that the needs of the Delta ecosystem ought to come before the water supplies of farmers. And to me, it reinforced the importance of our state policy and the foundation of the Delta Plan, that we've got two co-equal goals. And it's both meeting water needs of farmers and other water users and a healthy ecosystem, including healthy fisheries. And we've promised that we're going to pursue those goals with the best science and guided by our own experience in a balanced way. And we can see that each of us might make those adjustments, make decisions that we would be called upon in a little different way as we try to find that balance. But I think as the stewards of the Delta, I appreciate the difficult decisions those folks are having to make and the diligence with which they're approaching their statutory responsibilities. We had a great tour. I wanted to thank Keith Coolidge and his staff for helping put it together. That was worth noting. I think last month I talked about the report of the Legislative Analyst's Office about the implementation of the Delta Reform Act. I had a chance to meet with them recently and discuss the report and offered several observations that I have also transmitted in a letter to them that I'll share with you when I get back to the office. It just got out the door earlier this week, and we haven't had a copy to get it PDF'd, and so I can transmit it to you. But we had pointed out to the LAO that contrary to their conclusions, we think the Delta plan is enforceable in the ways in which its regulatory structure works and appeals in terms of the responsibility of folks who have appeals against their projects upheld. Their responsibility to revise their projects in response to the Council's findings is, we believe, clear. We also talked about the definitions that the Council has provided about how it will measure reducing reliance and the value of providing some flexibility to water users as we attempt to measure their efforts to diversify their supplies. And I think the LAO understands our position, but it probably may not be theirs. So we passed that on to them with a letter. I wanted to say briefly, I appreciated a chance to go to San Francisco last Tuesday to participate in the U.S. Netherlands Sustainability Summit that was organized by the Dutch consulate down there. It was a great opportunity to meet with leaders from about 40 Dutch agencies and businesses, including the Dutch leaders of our Arcadis consulting team, and with an equal number of colleagues from California. The discussions focused on improving the resilience of the Bay Area from threats like floods and earthquakes and the changing climate. Henko Vink, who is a Dutchman who's been recruited to advise the U.S. about the recovery in New York and New Jersey from Hurricane Sandy, gave a talk that reinforced a message that you yourselves have delivered in developing the Delta Plan, that everybody who's affected by decisions needs to be invited into the discussion about what strategies we ought to pursue, that both immediate needs and long-term goals need attention, and that our agencies are a lot more effective when we get out of our silos and work together with all the tools and funds that are available. So I learned a lot from being able to participate, and it's great to see the talent that agency folks and business people and academics from California and from Europe, the Europeans who are doing business here, can bring to these decisions. Finally, and trust me, no one's happier to say this than I, our executive officer, Jessica Pearson, is going to be back from maternity leave on Monday. Not that it hasn't been a pleasure working with you all over the past few months. I want to make that clear. One of the first thing on Jessica's calendar, we'll be helping to finalize council staff priorities for 2015, which we'll be discussing in detail at the March meeting. These are not just like continuing the actions that we've got underway now, like our Delta Levee investment strategy that we're talking about this afternoon, or identifying high priority science actions for consideration by the Delta Plan Implementation Committee and for funding that we hope will be available with our new science program budget. But also new activities that y'all identified recently, like reviewing our communication strategy. So I suspect you'll be hearing from Jessica in the coming weeks as she considers directions for the coming year. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dan. I have two other items that are a carryover from last month's meeting. Questions from the council regarding, or comment really, regarding the need for standardizing water use reporting, and then a question about what is our messaging regarding water conservation. You've done some research on both of those.
Yeah, I think we've got a report that's being prepared by our staff that we can share with you soon about reporting. We did raise the issue with the State Water Resources Control Board recently in hearings they held about information that's being gathered to measure urban water agencies' improvements in efficiency over the drought period in response to the governor's executive orders. So we encourage them to take actions that would, as part of that reporting, make these things more uniform. And we've also been reaching out to the Department of Water Resources about the way they collect information about urban and agricultural water management plans. But we hope to have a fuller report soon. And then on the communications issue, of course, the short-term water conservation communications is being handled, as we discussed last month, through the Save Our Water campaign that the Department of Water Resources and the Association of California Water Agencies are delivering throughout California, with millions of dollars of local agency and other marketing behind it. But when we talk about the communication strategy, Jessica, I think we need to give her time if she comes back to say, yeah, that is something we need to be working on this year. I think that we've all committed to, at the staff level, be prepared to do that, and we'd be able to bring that to the council for a more thorough discussion, say in probably April or May.
Great. Questions of Dan? If not, I don't believe we have a legal update.
We don't, but if I could take 1 second, I just wanted to publicly recognize Dan Ray for the job that he did. He's sometimes he's humble, sometimes he isn't, but he really did a service to this board and to this agency by stepping up, so I sure hope you guys paid him double, because I'm impressed by the vast knowledge that he really has and the help that he's shown all of us. So just from my perspective, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I want to echo that. I have the privilege of getting to work with Dan very closely, and I really admire his skills and his commitment to the work that we do. I was telling our executive fellow on the way over here, sometimes I feel bad for Parks and Recreation because we hired Dan away from them, and I think it was a huge loss to them. But we're glad you're here, Dan. Okay.
It's not a decision I ever regret, you know, and it's funny because when I left Parks and Rec, my friends there were like, well, this is so, you have to work on such beautiful issues. Why would you go over there to a place that's just all about arguments and chaos, you know? But the advantage today, of course, and I probably think I'm on video, so I should think how I'm going to say this, you know, is at least in our world, the conflicts are external. They swirl around us. But internally, we work pretty well together. And that's beauty in its own way.
Good. Okay, on to file item number 5B, legislative update. Our executive fellow, Gavin Landgraf, has been doing double duty, serving as our ledge director of recent, and the legislature has piled upon him numerous bills in the last couple of weeks.
Yes, they have. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, council members. In this report, I'm just going to go over the committee updates from this month and then look at some notable bills that I want to highlight from the list that I put on the desk in front of you before the meeting. That's updated from the list that's in the binder. Since the deadline to submit bills is not until tomorrow, it's a fluid situation. We're still receiving more bills even up to the deadline. But the picture is nearly complete, and this is the initial image of the portfolio, or this is our initial snapshot of the portfolio that we're going to see from the legislature this year. But of course, it's subject to change based on the committee work that gets done. So first, with the updates from the committees, the Assembly Committee on Water, Parks, and Wildlife, chaired by Assemblymember Mark Levee, met on February 10th to hold an oversight hearing on the implementation of Proposition 1, the water bond. Chapter 8, the $2.7 billion storage portion of the bond, received the most attention. Committee members were particularly interested in the public benefits requirement, the continuous appropriation process, and the procedure that the Water Commission will be using to award funds. The Senate Committee on Budget and Fiscal Review met 2 days later on February 12th to hold a hearing on local and state water funding relationships. Proposition 1 was the main topic of discussion, and once again, the public benefits and cost-sharing requirements received a significant amount of attention. Additionally, the committee heard testimony on paying for water projects in disadvantaged communities. There are 5 bills I want to draw your attention to in this document of bills that we're tracking. The first is on page 2, Assembly Bill 311, introduced by Assemblymember James Gallagher. This is the Assembly version of Senate Bill 127, which is authored by Senator Vidak, and it involves the streamlining of CEQA rules for Prop 1 water storage projects. The only major difference between this and Senator Vidak's bill, which I reported on last month, is that this applies only to storage projects, whereas the Senate version of this bill applies to all projects funded under Proposition 1. The second is Assembly Bill 501, which is authored by Assemblymember Levee, who is chair of the Water, Parks, and Wildlife Committee. This very much affects the council. The bill would do 2 things. First, it would, this is on page 4, by the way, of the document in front of you. It would do 2 things. It would require that all state-funded research data must be made available at the request of the Delta Science Program to the Delta Science Program. And then second, it would put the Independent Science Board in charge of making, when necessary, exceptions and changes to the requirements for reporting of that primary research. The third bill is on page 8, and that's Senate Bill 223, authored by Senator Galgiani, and that would require the Division of Boating and Waterways no later than January 1st, 2017, to establish an advisory and oversight committee to monitor the Division of Boating and Waterways activities relating to invasive aquatic plant control in the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta, its tributaries, and the Sassoon Marsh. The fourth bill is also on page 8, Senate Bill 226. The author is Senator Pavley. This bill would provide that the legislature establish a process for courts to use when determining groundwater rights. As introduced, the bill simply lays out the general topics on which guidance will be provided, but the bill is a vehicle for later amendments that will spell out the process that the courts must follow when determining groundwater rights. And then the fifth and final bill that I want to draw to your attention is Senate Bill 228, authored by Senator Cannella. And this is on the beneficial use of water, and it would provide that using water to recharge groundwater levels or prevent saltwater intrusion is a beneficial use of water. So this is a cleanup amendment to the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. Thank you.
Thank you, Gavin. Any questions of Gavin? Yes, Mary?
Just a comment. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gavin, thank you for the report. Initially, I was going to ask you why we didn't see AB 501 on here, but you added it, so thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And Mr. Chairman, just a question, process, does this, because I'm new here, does the Stewardship Council ever provide comment as these bills are considered through the legislative process as how they may relate to the Stewardship Council? And if so, that may be one that we want to take a look at.
The short answer is yes, occasionally, and I would allow my colleagues to amplify that if they wish.
And then what's the process to determine if a particular bill deserves comment from the council?
It will come from a council member
Okay.
or a staff recommendation.
Well, we did, however, in 2010 or 11, adopt policies about taking positions on legislation, particularly in between meetings. And I think that, I'm trying to remember the details, the chair and the vice chair are required to agree to take a position on legislation if there is not a council meeting coming up. I'd want to check that for accuracy, but that's my recollection. We have not taken many positions on bills over the last 4.5 years.
Why don't I can send you the written
Policy,
procedure,
sure.
and that would bring us all up to date. Maybe I'll send it out to all council members.
That would be great, and then to request possibly at the next meeting or even April, I know it's very early in the legislative process for the bills that Gavin has just brought before us for special consideration, but as the legislative cycle or session moves forward, we might want to consider highlighting a few bills of importance to the Stewardship Council that we may want to maybe not necessarily take a position on, maybe we do, maybe we don't, but to comment on the content of the bills as they're proposed. Thank you. Thank you, Gavin.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Good job, Gavin. Thank you.
Thank you,
Dan,
Mr. Chair.
anything further on file item 5?
Not that I'm aware of.
All right, that concludes file item 5. Do we have any public comment? None. On to file item number 6, lead scientist report. Dr. Peter Goodwin, welcome.
Yeah, well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon, everyone. And first of all, it's just nice to be here. You're in the Delta. I teach modeling in my university job, and what we teach in the very first class is that you can't model anything you haven't experienced. So it's great, and I appreciate the hosting we had this morning. So there's several items here of upcoming activities in March, and for all of these activities, on behalf of the science community, we invite the council members to show up to anything you have time for or you have interest in. So I'm just going to run through these upcoming events, and please bear in mind if you have time or you have a particular interest in these topics, we'd love to see you there. The first activity is coming up next Tuesday, March the 3rd, and it's our next CARBUS seminar. If you remember, this is a collaboration with the University of California, Davis, and it's where we would like to get together a group of scientists and managers to address specific issues. And it's an opportunity to discuss the scientific issues in depth, with the idea that the outcome of these workshops will be a write-up in our online journal or similar. The topic of this seminar next week is on sturgeon. And in our system, we deal with two sturgeon, the white sturgeon and the much rarer green sturgeon. And these are very, very interesting your animals. They grow to, certainly in the Columbia Basin, in excess of 5 meters in length. They're very large. They're also extremely ancient. They've been on the planet, I think, since pretty soon after the dinosaurs. So they've been around for a very long time. But what's very specific about them, and one of the things the Council may wish to you bear in mind, is that an adult sturgeon grows to well over 200 years old. And so if you think about what that might mean in terms of adaptive management, we deal with smelt, basically a 1-year life cycle, salmon 4 to 6 years. So you have an opportunity under adaptive management to go through several life cycles. But here we're dealing with species that have been around. There are animals out there that have been in existence much longer than the dams and the levees and all of the other changes we've made into the system. And so it's one of the conundrums. How do you actually implement adaptive management for these kinds of species? So the purpose of this meeting is to just give an update, have an exchange amongst the various agencies. There are speakers from the National Marine Fisheries Service, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, Corps of Engineers, Department of Water Resources, and of course all of the considerable research that's going on at the University of California, Davis. So that's the first item. There's a link if you want to get more details about that. We also have 2 significant science meetings coming up. The first is what's known as QEMF. This is the California Water Environmental Modeling Forum, which will be held March the 9th to the 11th in Folsom, the Lake Natomas Inn. This is the 21st annual meeting of this group. And for those modelers who have been around for a while, it's a remarkable organization. It's taken us from the point where we would be sitting around arguing the merits of one model over another, and we would just get bogged down in the details. What this organization has done over the years is to provide, as it says, a forum where the technical merits of models can be debated. Models can be run in a very structured, comparative way to understand the various assumptions that go into the model. So QEMF is a remarkable organization. There's several things which could be of interest to the Council. I won't go through the entire agenda, but just wanted to highlight a few things that might be of interest to you. So on Tuesday, March the 10th, there's an entire session starting at 10 o'clock on integrated water resource models. So Chair Fiorini, this is getting to the concept that you had expressed at the science conference a few years ago about how do you build universal models or comprehensive models that bring together many of the areas of expertise. And also that same morning, there's a session on the historical delta modeling project. You're trying to understand what was there in the past, what was important from the ecological and hydrological perspective. Tuesday afternoon, there's a session with the very provocative title of A Deluge of Drought Modeling. So it's going to try and pull together the results of the various efforts that have gone on to understand the effects of droughts and the decisions made around drought actions. On Wednesday, I thought this might be of interest to the chair. There's a section on California water rights analyses and modeling, how those two can be pulled together. So I think there's some innovative thinking going on in that arena. And in the afternoon, there's a session on the California Water Plan update, key contents, what's being done. So of course that's of great interest, its relationship to the Delta Plan, Delta Science Plan and things like that. So lots of other good things going on there, but I just wanted to highlight things that could be of particular interest to you. The other big science meeting we've got going on is the IEP, the Interagency Ecological Program. That's held in the same location. If you recall, many of you came, I think last year and the year before, to some of this event. In the past, the QEMF and IEP have overlapped. There was a one-day overlap, so all of the aquatic ecologists would get together with the hydrodynamic modelers for one day. Unfortunately, for a whole host of reasons, it didn't work out this year. So the IEP workshop is March the 18th to the 20th. And a few of the topics being covered here. advancing the understanding of Delta smelt, particularly much of the research that IEP themselves have done over the last 12 months. There's also a session, again, I think close to the heart of some of the thinking of the Council, of emerging technologies related to Delta fish management, what can be brought to bear. And there's also sessions on predation, our current understanding of where we are there, and of course advancing the life cycle models. If you recall, there's very comprehensive efforts going on by the National Marine Fisheries Service for the salmon life cycle modeling, amongst others, and US Fish and Wildlife's attempts for the life cycle of smelt. So that's coming up in March. Are there any questions on those meetings before I go and look back in the past of what happened in the last month? The next topic here is under science communication, and we were delighted to host the National Science Foundation Science Being the Messenger workshop, which was held on February 10th to the 11th. We had more than 75 scientists participating from across the various agencies. If you recall, Chair Fiorini had issued an invitation to the DPIC meeting, and we wanted to have engagement from all of the DPIC agencies. And the second day of this workshop, it was a smaller, much more intense training on science communication. We don't have the feedback, because it's NSF, they want to know about outcomes, how the workshop was received. They're still compiling that information, so we will report that back to you about the effectiveness and what people thought about the workshop. But I thought I would just highlight 2 or 3 things, particularly for Vice Chair Eisenberg. They gave one of the best talks I think I've heard on the use of PowerPoint by scientists. And they described how scientists put together PowerPoint presentations. And as they were talking about how it was done, he had a big image behind him. So this was Dan Agan, the former head of PBS. And on the picture, there was a scientist giving a keynote lecture at a fisheries conference. And the title was something like Inter-Individual Genetic Recognition of Stickleback. And then under that it said slide 1 of 273. And without, if we ever host this again, the first day was just delightful, a lot of humor, a lot of great examples. But also because it was the National Science Foundation, what was particularly interesting is that everything they say, there's a lot of communications workshops, but they would stop and then talk about the research that was behind what they were saying. And just as one example, we learned about a magic word. And the magic word is because. And when you're being asked to respond to a question, typically a scientist would give a statement and then say something like, the evidence is, or whatever, our current understanding. And in these very structured scientific experiments, which I believe were done by Harvard, they did a delivery that way, and then they changed exactly the same message, but they connected, this is what's important and why, with the word because. And the credibility jumped about 35 percentage points. And so these little things that you pick up when you're talking to the media, when you're talking to other folks, very important. And the last thing I just mentioned about that, I would encourage perhaps when Yumiko comes up to do by the numbers, she may want to comment as she participated. But the other thing, yesterday I was just talking to a group of folks on a totally different thing, and they were saying, well, we're just preparing a presentation for our board, and we've almost finished our triangle, which is one of the techniques that they picked up in the workshop. So I think certainly a lot of the participants did find it a very useful activity. And so that was the workshop, and just also we'd like to publicly thank the National Science Foundation. I think I mentioned before they have requests to give this workshop all over the country to many different groups, and we really appreciate the fact that they realize the importance of science communication in our Bay Delta system. So Yumiko, if you wanted to come down, and Sam, I don't know if you're going to join her to give us by the numbers. And if you wanted to make a comment about couple of sentences to whether you enjoyed the workshop or not?
Good morning, or good afternoon.
Welcome.
Thank you. I did enjoy the workshop, and I did use a modified version of the triangle for an upcoming talk, so hopefully I will get my message across, and it'll be all good. So, it has rained since we've last met. Not as much as we'd wanted, but I feel it's better than nothing, so. Speaking of rain, I will begin with discussing the precipitation. It's increased a bit since last month. However, the seasonal average has decreased. This month, northern and southern Sierras was at 30.3 inches and 13.1 inches respectively, and the seasonal average has dropped from last month. North Sierra was 96%, and now it's 89%. The Southern Sierras actually remain the same at 49%. Similarly, snowpack has also decreased. This reflects possibly the warmer weather as well as the lack of precipitation. This may make things quite interesting in the summer months. As I mentioned last month, a third of the water during the dry months comes from snowpack. So given the decreasing values, this may make things complicated. On the other hand, reservoir storage has increased from being in the mid 60% to about mid 70% this month. On to flow. The reason I updated the document was mainly due to the change in flow from earlier this month. Earlier this month, the Sacramento River at Freeport was about 36,743 cubic feet per second. However, it's dropped to 12,365, and this reflects the influence of the rains at the beginning of the month. Salinity has not changed that much from last month to this month, although the San Joaquin River has dropped from being 1,024 microsiemens per centimeter to 803. And now on to Delta Smelt. I was really excited because the cumulative salvage was holding at 56, and I was going to say that there was zero salvage since January 7th, but there was some salvage that occurred on the 23rd, so the number is now 68. As you know, the presence of Delta Smelt is highly correlated with turbid water, and so this salvage value on the 23rd is most likely associated with the packet of turbid water resulting from the rain earlier this month. As an example, in December, the turbidity at the Sacramento sensor near Hood peaked at about 391 NTU, and about a month later we observed an increase in turbidity around the salvage stations, and then concurrently we had about a week's worth of Delta Smelt salvage, bringing us to the value of 56. Earlier this month, the same sensor at Hood peaked at 467 NTU, and it looks like it may be already making its way down, resulting in the salvage values on Monday. So that concludes the numbers.
Thank you, Yumiko. Any questions? Mary?
Thank you. I love this report. The colors really help make the information exciting, even though it is a little depressing. Miko, on the lower right-hand corner, your colors for good, fair, poor, and bad, in your report, your initial report for this month, and then your revised one, those numbers the colors of your words are different. The good, fair, poor, and bad. Now you seem to have a clear between the yellow and the orange, which for me, I just wanted to seems to lend a little more clarity to your message, which is green is good, red is bad, and in the middle you have yellow and orange. So I don't know if there's going to be a consistency here. The most recent one I like, and just personally, and it seems to lend more punch to the numbers in conveying the message of your the data.
Thank you. I will plan to keep that color variation.
Thank you. Again, thank you for the report.
Thank you.
Okay, I think that completes file item 6. Anything else, Peter?
No, Chair,
Great.
that concludes the report.
Okay, thank you. Any public comment on file item 6? Very well. Moving on now to file item number 7, Delta Plan Contract Amendment, Cindy Messer.
Oops, great. Good afternoon. Get organized here. So thank you very much for allowing us to have this agenda item here today. This is an action item, as you're aware, one of the few I've been able to bring to the council in quite some time. The requested action today is staff are asking the council to authorize the executive officer to increase the total dollar amount of our contract with CH2M Hill by $800,000 to allow us to complete some tasks under the early implementation of the Delta Plan, and also to allow us to do a transfer of a variety of pieces of information, some data, some files, some documentation, some processes between various members of the consulting team to newly hired members of the council staff. So we would need some additional time and capacity to be able to do that transfer. I would point out that the funding sources for this dollar amount come from the remaining Proposition 84 funds that were appropriated to the council, as well as some general fund dollars that we received through a budget change proposal process that were specifically allocated for performance measures tasks. And with that, I would point out that the bulk of the requirement under this completing initial Delta Plan implementation tasks lies with the performance measures, which we describe in the staff report and also follow along with the December update that we provided to the council, where we walk through what's left to do in terms of performance measures. All of the tasks we discussed and we identified were in the original scope of work for the contract. We're just at the point where we need to finalize assessment on some of the performance measures, develop a report that we bring back to the council this summer, and then again, it's a transfer of knowledge. We have been relying very heavily on our consulting team for the performance measures effort. We acquired several new positions through a budget change proposal process to bring staff in to work on performance measures. We have one staff on board, one starts next week, and so we need some additional time to be able to get them up to speed and have the consulting team transfer everything over to the staff. The dollars that we're asking for in this amendment would also allow us to bring over some of the GIS information. Very similar scenario in that the consulting team has been largely responsible for retaining the GIS information, helping us with inquiries and different products we needed to generate as we've moved into implementing the Delta Plan. We now have staff on board with this expertise, so we'll bring that in-house. And then just in general, we have different types of technical inquiries that we receive, and we're still at times needing to go back to some of the consulting team members, especially around the EIR, maybe some of the early days of the Delta Plan development, in some cases to help out a bit with the litigation support. So we need a little additional time and capacity to continue to access these individuals on the consulting team. So with that, I would welcome any questions.
I'm thinking, I just want to suggest to you, we suspect that this will be the last time we'll come to the council to seek augmentation or extension of this contract. CH has been a great team. They've been with us for a long time throughout the development of the Delta Plan, but this will probably conclude their work with us, and we've appreciated their service. The push that Cindy's team is making to get the performance measures done is responsive to one of the points that the LAO's report made, and so I think this is entirely appropriate, and we hope you'll approve it.
Phil, do you have a comment?
Now, just a question. The funds that are available to pay for this are not otherwise committed to other things at the present time?
No, they are not.
Thank you. Mary?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just would like to ask staff, and I have had a conversation with Dan and have the value, but when we're doing these contract additions, if we can look at the total contract cost in addition to the request for the amendment, I would appreciate it. So the total contract cost so far on this is $13,450,000, and with this addition would bump it to $14,250,000, which is a lot of money. And I think as stewards of our taxpayer dollars, we need to be mindful of the total cost, not just the request in front of us. So if we can do that, I would appreciate it. And with that, Mr. Chairman, would you like a motion?
Yes.
I would move the item as presented by staff.
Second.
We have a motion and a second, PIFO and Eisenberg. Is there any public comment on this matter? All right. We'll begin with the vote. Foreign?
Eisenberg, aye.
Fiorini, aye.
PIFO, aye.
Motion passes unanimously. On to file item number 8. Cindy,
Okay?
you're
I'll
already
stay
in
right here.
position.
Yes.
You want to pull your team together? File item number 8 is the Delta Levee Investment Strategy Update.
Great, thank you. For right now, I'm going to have Dustin join me up here, and it will be sort of a back and forth of different folks coming up to the table. Thanks. So with that, let me talk about the purpose of this agenda item, the 3 different elements that I see we need to cover, and a suggested approach for getting through this one, because it's quite a beefy agenda item, and I think we have a lot of interest based on who's in the audience today. So as I mentioned, there are 3 elements that we need to cover today. The first is a very quick touch on the information that staff have provided in the staff report related to state expenditures over time for Delta Levee investments. What we're trying to do is be responsive to the request from council members for additional information. This was part of the request that we received in January, and I know actually there were previous council meetings where council members asked for this type of information. So we wanted to bring this back today. What I'd like to do is, in a minute, I'll turn it over to Dustin. I've just asked him to summarize and touch upon the highlights, just so everybody knows what they're looking at and kind of maybe if there's any caveats you should know about. So that'll be the first item. The second item is our continuation of our discussion about state goals and objectives for levee investments and the state interests that those goals and objectives should further, as well as touching upon state liability. So we started this discussion back in January. We want to continue it today. Staff have brought back some alternatives or alternative approaches that we would like some reaction to, some feedback on. We also have a panel that we've pulled together of key state agency representatives who have different roles, various responsibilities related to Delta Levee investments and improvements and administrative funding for those programs. So I'll bring those folks up as well. And then the last element in this entire agenda item and presentation is a PowerPoint presentation that Larry Roth from Arcadis, he's our project manager for the consulting side of the team, he's going to provide a presentation on the concept of tolerable risk. And what we'd like to do is walk you through the concept and how we envision incorporating this into the Delta Levee investment strategy, into the methodology, and so on. It'll be an introduction piece. We envision doing something like this over the next few council meetings with key elements from the levee investment strategy methodology. As they're being developed, we want to bring them to the council ahead of the peer review process as best we can. So those are the 3 elements. What I would suggest is running through each of those independently from beginning to end, starting with staff presentations. In the case of the goals and objectives discussion, I'll have a little presentation on the alternatives. I'd like to bring the panel up. They're going to walk through the questions that we've armed them with ahead of the council meeting. And then I would suggest maybe we open it up to public comment, testimony right after the panel is done, and then open it up for question and answer and discussion with the council at the end of that, just so we can get all of the information out on the table and have a discussion towards the end of that item.
Those certainly it'd be appropriate for council members to ask questions of state
yes.
agency officials while they're up. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. So And then with, same sort of scenario with the risk presentation. We'll have Larry run through it. We can definitely stop for questions along the way. Once he's done, we might want to hear from the public and their questions on the presentation and whatnot, and then have a little deeper discussion after that. So that would be my suggested approach if the council's comfortable with that, and we'll try to keep it going at a pretty steady clip.
That
So-
sounds good. And then at the end, you'll come back up and summarize for us takeaways?
I will. So Dustin and I will be scribbling as quickly as we can, any questions that come up or follow-up needed. I'll do that, and then very quickly I'll take less than 10 minutes to run through what to expect between now and the March council meeting. We have a couple key activities that are going to take place. I want to set those up as well. So, okay, well with that then, I think I'm going to turn it over to Dustin and we'll touch on that background information we provided. So.
Okay, thank you, Cindy. Thank you, Council. As Cindy mentioned, I know there's a lot to get through this afternoon, so this portion will be fairly brief. I just wanted to draw the Council's attention to some of the financial information we've been able to gather with the help of the Department of Water Resources. They've been an excellent partner as this effort is moving along and providing information for us to help formulate this picture of Delta Levee investments and strategies. So they were able to provide us with some background information from two of their key programs. These are the Delta Levee's Maintenance Subventions Program and the Delta Levee Special Flood Control programs. As you know, these two programs have been very well known throughout the Delta and as far as providing funds for levee maintenance and improvements and rehabilitation. So what I'd just like to draw the Council's attention to, we have two attachments in your packet, two maps of the Delta, one for the Subventions Program and one for the Special Flood Control Projects Program. And the effort here is to just kind of help formulate the picture of where the state funding is going. The two maps that you have in your packet show state expenditures for the time periods noted. The Subventions Program expenditures from 1987 to 2013, and the Special Flood Control Projects Program shows 1997 to 2014 data. As you know, the Subventions Program was in effect before 1987. It actually started in 1973, but this was the available data that we had as far as the reclamation districts and the ability to split the costs out. So that's why it's more of a truncated period than what the entire program was actually in effect for. And just to highlight some summary data from these two programs, as I mentioned, the Subventions Program covers the information we have before you here is for 1987 to 2013. In that time period, 76 reclamation districts participated in the Subventions Program at least once, receiving state funding. Throughout that period, the state expenditures were approximately $165 million total, and the local expenses as part of the Subventions Program were $106 million in total. And you see a pie chart in your packets that show the approximate median cost distribution between the state and local cost share in there. You can see the state contribution for that period. The median amount was 67%, and the local contribution was 33%. As far as the Special Projects Program goes, for between 1992 through 2012, the total state expenditures were $338 million roughly for that time period. And throughout that portion, the records are a little more complex on special projects just because of the type of programs they are. The programs have a tendency to extend beyond just one annual amount, and they cover several time periods for the project. So there's a little more discrepancies in there. But we were able to determine that the range of state cost share percentages for this time period range between 75% to 100%. And the average state cost share percentage within that time period was approximately 96%. So those are really the only items I wanted to highlight for those portions. And again, this is just to help formulate the picture of state and local spending as we get deeper into this investment strategy.
Susan?
So thank you for summarizing the data. This is a really useful format, both the pie chart and the maps. And I just have a question on the Delta Levee's Special Flood Control Projects map. It says 1997 to 2014, not 87.
Yes, this one's actually 97.
Okay, thank you.
And again, that was just the readily available data that was easily ascertained for this. The programs did go, naturally the programs did start before that.
Yeah.
Yes.
And one more question. Did any of these projects quantify benefits gained or problems addressed by the expenditures?
Within the files themselves, we don't have that data. Basically, what we have is the table of the cost, but I'm sure we could work with DWR to go back and review the projects and what their proposal solicitation package were, especially for the special flood control projects. Mm-hmm. Those usually come out of a solicitation package. So we'd be able to work with DWR, I'm sure, to see what was in the application and what the benefits were that they were achieving with those projects.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that would be useful. I'm trying to get a sense of what the pattern of problems has been. Just
as far as what the projects are trying to address?
Right,
okay.
Right, and the benefits gained.
Sure.
Okay, Phil and then Pat.
I'm trying to remember in my own mind earlier draft memos that you've done with financial information. But let me just clarify for my own understanding what this, I believe, shows. On page 2 of your staff memo, under the category of past state expenditures for delta levies, does this include expenditures within the statutory delta for project levies and non-project levies, or simply for one category?
Both.
Okay.
It's conceivable that there are additional state expenditures that might have been done for project levies through programs other than these two, but rather
Well, I understand, I think we fall too readily into the trap of simply talking about each discrete funding program and acting as if it's kind of everything, when in fact it's part of the puzzle of state, local, and federal expenditures throughout pieces of the state of California, not just restricted to the statutory delta. But it's hard to keep track of the context and understand who pays how much for what based on this. Just a couple of suggestions.
Okay.
When you do have a caption that says past state expenditure for delta levies, in my judgment, you should include all expenditure for all levies, but you must then break it out in different ways. Project levies, where we have obligations that are founded in congressional and state statutes in the Central Valley floodplain. And secondarily, any other legal obligation imposed by court order or something. I mean, just to get a perspective on the issue. And then you throw in the levee maintenance subvention program and the special projects program. But, you know, I looked at this and I was reading it last night. And, well, am I right that between these two programs, the state has spent $503 million and the locals have spent $106 total, combine them? I understand there are different requirements in different territories, but I can't put my hands on facts unless I see the whole and then the discrete components that follow from the whole. So am I right or wrong? And Dan, there was an earlier memo, I think last month, month before, 2 months ago, that had done a crack at larger scale figures.
Yeah, I think we've, often we report the expenditures since the origins of the program, and that's a larger number. And sometimes when we report that, we also include the funds that are obligated but not yet expended as well. So you can have a sense of this total scale of the state commitment. That's how the numbers that are in the Delta plan were compiled. So here you're getting, because we tried to provide the more geographic detail and the cost share detail that you had asked for, Mr. Vice Chair. This was the way that DWR was able to provide that information. We went back much beyond these states. They didn't have their records digitized in some cases, and it was more difficult to do. So I think these cover the periods for which data is readily available.
Well, okay, but
Your point, I think, is well taken, too, that not only are there maybe other state funds that have gone into project levies for emergency or erosion repairs or the improvements to the project levies in West Sacramento and the Pocket, for example.
Oh, yeah,
and then there may
huge.
also be post-disaster assistance that we haven't looked
well,
at either.
it just seems to me somehow we're moving toward, I believe, what becomes the best compendium of information on state and local and federal involvement in levies within, I'd say, the Central Valley and the Delta. That's what I think. That's where we're kind of headed when we do a levy investment strategy. And you'll want, when you get there, to provide the background information for the reader so they can understand the amount of money that's been spent. For example, the ballot proposition that authorized $5 billion post-Katrina for levy investments was heavily weighted to non-Delta levies, but levies within the Central Valley Flood Control Authority, and we spent a ton of money.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
Of some of those expenditures are within the legal delta to improve levees in
That's
West
right.
Sacramento, for example.
That's correct.
Yeah.
But I believe those were all project levies
Yeah,
within
and
the
that's-
Delta.
We
Anyway,
haven't accounted for that here.
yeah,
You're right.
point is just the presentation and formatting. I liked the chart very much for the subvention programs, but I was puzzled why you didn't do the same chart for the special projects program. And third, I would have said, why wouldn't you consolidate them for purposes of analysis with a separate chart, just saying what the overall figures are? Because one of the hardest things in this discussion is to figure out if there is any state policy except ad hoc spending that exists today. Of my own mind, I am relatively clear that there's not much because it's so confusing. But I mean, the information is here, it's valuable, but just the presentation has to inform us and the public at large at every step of the process. And so that's my weighing in on that.
Patrick? Nope. Anyone else? Okay,
Okay.
next.
Thank you. So, moving on to our discussion of goals and objectives for state investments and Delta levies, state interests, and liability. So, just a recap, last month we presented these 3 questions to the council, and part of the direction that we received back was to go and develop some alternative approaches. And in fact, council members gave us some thoughts on that, including some bookends, ranging from business as usual, status quo type approach for levy investment strategy, all the way to one that was very goal-oriented and prudent. And so what staff did was we kind of fleshed those 2 alternatives out, came up with a couple of other alternatives that we've put into the staff report. And let me just, I know you've read this, let me just quickly run through some of the highlights of the 4 alternatives, and then we can go from there either with the panel or with questions from the council. So our 4 alternatives, the first one, as I mentioned, the business as usual, looks very similar to what's in the Delta plan right now in terms of our interim priorities. So numerous goals, very broad, no prioritization per se, but really the objective being to balance the investments and balance the expenditures between these numerous goals over time. The approach also seeks to ensure that we meet required levels of protection. So, for example, 200-year protection for the urban and urbanizing areas. And then there are other desired levels of protection that vary depending on the assets being protected, the benefits being gained, funding available, levies, and the condition of the levies, and so on. So that would be like your HMP or better, and this would be mostly focused on the non-project levies. So that's our business as usual approach. Then staff took a stab at tinkering with that a little bit. So we came up with business as usual 2.0. And what we did with that is we narrowed the goals a little bit. And really what we sort of shaved off was a couple of the Delta as place type goals. So if you will, we thought, well, maybe aspects like aesthetics or recreation might come off the list in this 2.0 version. But amongst the remaining goals, and there's still many, what we would focus more closely in on are elements such as cost share alternatives. And what we mean by this is, well, actually, sorry, let me take one step back. One of the things we would focus on under 2.0 is projects that provided multiple benefits or met multiple objectives. So that would be something that's a little different from what's in the Delta Plan now. It is in line with the Department of Water Resources Special Projects program. They do focus on multiple objectives and multi-beneficial projects. So that would be one element that would be focused on. Then we would want to attempt, or at least we would envision tailoring cost-sharing alternatives under this alternative. So looking at our multiple beneficial projects, who are the beneficiaries beyond the landowners, beyond the state? So it would add a different level of a cost share portion that other beneficiaries might be able to pay into. It goes along with the work we're doing under our current levee investment strategy to look at the different categories of beneficiaries, and also with the work that the Delta Protection Commission is doing with their feasibility study for an assessment district. So that would be one element that would be slightly different than the business as usual. The other part of that I should mention is we'd want to update the information and take a more recent look at the ability to pay question. So this is information based on the land use and the landowners, that there is information out, but I think it was generated back in the 1990s. This is some information that we envisioned under a scenario like this that we'd want to update and take a closer look at. Where are the differences among land uses and ability to pay among the landowners? And then the last element in this 2.0 that would be more focused on would be looking at benefit to cost ratio for various projects or investment opportunities. So looking at, obviously, do the benefits outweigh the costs that it would take to make the improvements, or perhaps even for recovery purposes. And these would all be elements or factors that would weigh into prioritizing investments in general under the strategy. So I think in a nutshell, that's alternative number 2. So let me move on quickly to number 3, which alternative number 3 we're calling our economic sustainability plan, Delta as Fortress alternative. And it's based very much on recommendations that were included in the economic sustainability plan, and also based on a paper or a report that was published by the PPIC back in 2007 called Envisioning Futures for the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta. So under this alternative, there would still be quite a few goals. They'd be related to protecting lives and property, water supply and water quality, and the Delta as place values. But what the recommendations and the desired levels of protection under this scenario would entail would be a higher degree of protection, and of course it would be a more expensive strategy or an alternative to implement. So we looked to the Delta Protection Commission's sustainability plan, and what we pulled out were recommendations around every island being protected to at least the Army Corps' PL 8499 standards of protection. And in addition, where you had rural non-project levees, there were recommendations to improve those to this fat levee configuration, so making them wider. And these were levees that would be protecting property, infrastructure, would provide some water quality benefits, and the fat levee configuration would add to reducing seismic risk and other natural hazards, risks from natural hazards. One element under alternative number 3 that is a little bit different than the business as usual falls under the ecosystem functions or goals. Under this alternative and the recommendations that came out of the 2 documents that we based this on, setback levees would not be considered as the suite of objectives or goals or activities that would fall under the ecosystem category.
In alternative 3?
Alternative 3, yes. So there's still ecosystem protection goals, but where for example, in the Delta Plan and our interim priorities, we have recommended possible areas for setback levees. Under this scenario, that would not be one of the options. And these would be setback levees to protect migratory corridors for anadromous fish. So one caveat that we wanted to point out that's a bit different from the business as usual alternative. And then the last alternative is sort of the other end of the spectrum. It's the goal-oriented, prudent approach. And in this one, we've really narrowed down the goals. And those are really the primary objectives, the primary goals under this alternative would be protecting lives, achieving the co-equal goals, and some infrastructure protection. So this would be critical infrastructure, that rises to the level of state interest. And that would also be among the primary considerations. Under this alternative, what would fall to either secondary considerations or in some cases might not even be included in the mix would be more of the Delta as place. So the cultural, aesthetic, historical, agriculture / private property elements would, as I mentioned, be either a secondary consideration or in some cases not be part of the strategy. So this is kind of the opposite end, at least as we crafted it from the business as usual approach. So in this alternative, the focus would be really on project levies and improvements to those levies, and it would be very selective in terms of the non-project levies that would be part of the investment strategy and those types of investments being prioritized under this alternative. So again, it's a narrow range and I think that's all I need to say about this alternative at this point. So in a nutshell, that's kind of how they came out for us. One of the things that staff would really like to get out of the discussion today is your reaction to what we've developed, your thoughts about, are there other alternative approaches? Where might we add elements or subtract elements from the ones that we've presented today? I've also asked our panel members who will be coming up in a minute to give us some of their thoughts in terms of looking at these alternatives and state goals and objectives from their agency's perspectives that should either be in the mix or perhaps not.
All right, well, let's keep this in mind. Let's hear from the panel.
Okay, so let me invite up our 4 panel members. Actually, scoot over because there's some very tricky footing under this table.
While Cindy's passing out the signs, maybe I'll do the introductions. And starting on Cindy's left, we're joined by Clyde McDonald, who's a member of the Central Valley Flood Control Board. Thanks very much for coming, Clyde. Eric Vink, Executive Officer of the Delta Protection Commission. Gary Bardini is the Deputy Director of the Department of Water Resources, who is responsible for integrated regional water management and the flood program over there. And then Carl Wilcox is a Special Assistant to the Director of the Department of Fish and Wildlife for Delta issues. So thank you very much, gentlemen, for coming. Cindy, you want to take over?
I will. Thanks, Dan. It's always fun getting these set up. So just quickly, in talking to all of these gentlemen, I asked them to cover 2 different elements for us today. I asked them to just provide the council with a very brief overview of what their agency's role is and responsibilities are related to Delta levies and levy investments and programs that they administer. And then we provided the panel members with a set of questions that you also have in your staff report that are very much linked with this discussion of goals and objectives and state interests. And I've asked them to review the questions and then to provide some of their thoughts and their feedback and reactions to those questions. So I'm not going to read the questions for the sake of time, but I think I will go ahead and turn the mic over to Clyde and let him kick off the panel presentations.
All right. My name's Clyde McDonald. I'm a member of the Central Valley Flood Protection Board. I'll sort of tell you what our agency does. When the federal government and the state government got together to authorize the flood control projects in the Sacramento and San Joaquin Valley. They kind of merged, built this project, was built by the Corps of Engineers. The state was responsible for lands, easements, rights-of-way, and liability. Well, the federal government has no liability on it. We agreed to take over that liability. The board, with the Department of Water Resources, kind of acts as the state partner in this. The Corps of Engineers is the federal partner. So these are what are called project levies. In the Delta, about 1/3 of the levies are project levies. The board has 4 primary responsibilities. The first one is to issue permits to people who want to go over, across, under, through those levees. We act like the landowner. I mean, if somebody wants to come and put a pipe through a levee, we have to make sure that it is done in an appropriate way, in a way that isn't going to collapse the levee. So we issue permits for that. We also have problems with people who go out and put pipes through levees or do other kinds of things without permits, without going through the proper thing, without using the proper kind of materials and so forth. So we also have an enforcement program on that. Our third element is to oversee the local maintaining agencies. So we have the Corps of Engineers, the department, and us, the local maintaining agencies, and they actually do a lot of the work. The department does it in some areas where there isn't a local maintaining agency, but so we oversee what they do. We, with the department, we work hand in hand to that. And our last authority is to approve the Central Valley Flood Protection Plan, which is prepared by the Department of Water Resources. So we act as the hearing board. We work closely with the department on this and to go through that. But at the end of the day, they will deliver that. They develop it. They deliver it to us. We go out and hold hearings. We approve it and have the ability to amend it and approve it. So those are what we do.
Do you want to offer any thoughts?
Well, do you want to just do that, or how do you want to do this?
Why don't you go ahead and finish, or provide us with some thoughts?
Okay, all right. Generally, I think, the state has an investment strategy today. And if you look back, say if you go back, if we could go back to about 1970 or so and look back, we would see lots and lots of Delta levee failures. I think, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I think it would average more than one a year. We had lots and lots of Delta levee failures. Then the Department of Water Resources came in with the subventions program. I think that was in 1973 under the WAY program. And then later the department came in with the special projects that was originally focused on the 8 western Delta islands and then was expanded to pretty much the whole Delta. Under those 2 programs, the state has spent over 4 decades, has spent roughly $500 million. That translates to about $1,000 per acre in the Delta. Now those are largely agricultural investments there. The state has also invested in the project levies and so forth. So I think the current investment program that we have has been wildly successful. We have very few Delta levee failures anymore. I think the last one was Jones Tract when Governor Schwarzenegger was governor. You know, a nice spring day, a nice blue sky, and the levee just went bleh. And so I think we have we have a program. We've also got a program where with the department on the Central Valley Flood Protection Plan, where the department has been doing a lot of work. The state has been giving a lot of grants, largely to urban areas from Proposition 1E. And so, you know, those monies are flowing in pursuant to the directive of the legislature in Prop 1E, which pretty much limits the money to urban funding. And that's, a lot of money has gone into the Marysville area, around the Feather and Yuba River confluences, and then around the American confluences with the Sacramento, West Sacramento, Natomas, into that area, and a little further down the road will be Stockton, and then than numbers of other smaller communities as well. So we have a real a very robust program to take care of flooding issues in the Delta. We have it. I think it's been very effective. It operates very well. I think one of the best parts about it is the special projects, which is a very flexible program that the department can kind of go around. It's not fixed, it's not rigid, it allows them pretty much to respond to things. In terms of sort of what do I think the priorities are, and these are my priorities, my board has not taken a position, but I think they would generally concur on these major priorities. And these are to a large extent driven by the Paterno lawsuit, where there was a failure of a project levee in 1986 up near Marysville, which on the Yuba River, which flooded the small community of Linda, which I would suspect very few people have ever heard of. That went through the court systems up and down, up and down, up and down, and in 2003, and this was in a case called Paterno, the state appellate court said the state is responsible for these levees. These levees were not properly constructed, and the state was thereby responsible. So anyway, so the courts came down and pretty much said, okay, state, you're responsible for this. Now, a lot of people disagree with the Paterno decision, but that puts a lot of liability. That was because of Paterno in 2003. The legislature then passed SB 5, which said that urban areas have to have 200-year protection, and so forth, and also passed Proposition 1E to try to deal with that. So what do I think are the priorities? Okay, I would say the largest priorities are the protection of the urban areas where we have lots and lots of people, major investments. If we lost a levee in Sacramento or Stockton or someplace like that, we wouldn't be talking about $500 million. We would be talking billions and billions of dollars. So that's what I would say is number one. Priority number two, I would say, would be the expansion of the Yolo bypass. Now, the Yolo bypass, I don't think it goes all the way up. The Yolo bypass is is normally farmed for agriculture. When there are very large storms, the water rises up and goes over a long concrete weir and flows into the Yolo bypass and goes out. In a large flood, the Yolo bypass carries 80% of the flood flow. So the size of that weir controls the flow split at that point between the Sacramento River and what goes down the Yolo bypass. Right now, the system is such that the water level in the Sacramento River is higher than it is in the Yolo bypass. So if we modify the opening, it's kind of like if we all had to run out of here on a fire, if only one of those doors would open, we might have some people might be injured, but if we could open both doors, you can get out. So by enlarging the Fremont Weir, more water can go down there, and it takes a straight shot down to the western delta. You can see it up there on that map. And it sends less water down the circuitous, multi-channel Sacramento River. So that's what I would say is second. The third item would be trying to make sure that our project levies are as adequate as we can. This goes back to we have a moral and legal responsibility to take care of those levies. We need to really step up to the plate, and I would say that the current flood board is really trying to do that. I think people might have been a little less responsible in the past. There is now a focus that we really have to be responsible to protect lives, and a lot of this is because a lot of people are, it's not just agriculture behind those levees the way it was constructed in the early 1910 era. One of the key issues that we have a problem with is the maintenance on project levees. It's not very good. A lot of the agricultural districts say, well, we can't afford to maintain them according to the core standards which the LMAs agreed that they would do, and in turn that the board I sit on agreed with the federal government that we would make sure that these levees are adequately maintained. Because of Katrina, the federal government is also kind of turning down the screws on levee maintenance and so forth. And so they have a program, PL 8499, which says that if a levee is damaged, if a project levee is damaged in a high water event, let's say it sloughs out or the levee fails, the federal government will come in, the Corps of Engineers will come in and repair that damage, provided that the levee district has maintained the levee in accordance with federal standards. At the present time, 64% of the levees, the project levees in the Delta do not meet that standard and have been kicked out of the program by the Corps of Engineers. I think there's a question hanging out there, exactly what happens now if we have a major levee event. Does this fall to the state? Does it fall to the LMA that says, gee, we have a shovel and a truck, what do you expect us to do? So resolving that issue with the Corps is relatively important. There is a sort of a problem, even if we do get proper levee maintenance, that if a levee fails, the Corps of Engineers will come in and say, well, we have to do a benefit cost analysis on this, and if the benefit cost ratio doesn't work out, then we don't fix it. So down in the Delta, this is a problem where very often the cost of fixing a large levee break doesn't pencil out. Another issue that's pretty important for us is taking care of illegal and non-compliant permits that we have in the Delta. So I would say those are maybe that's kind of flying a little lower than what you do, but those are our priorities. So thank you.
Through the chair, Clyde, thank you for that very much. Can you go into a little bit more what you mean by legal and non-compliant permits? Just your last reference.
Sure.
I don't know what you mean.
Sure. At virtually every one of our meetings, the Corps of Engineers comes in. They go out and they do, the Department of Water Resources does levee evaluations, levee maintenance and investigations. The Corps of Engineers does very comprehensive ones periodically. So at virtually every one of our meetings, the Corps of Engineers comes in and they show slides of what's wrong with levees. And we have sloughs that haven't been fixed, where the levee has sloughed off, where we have lots of rodent holes all through the levee that makes it look like Swiss cheese. We have pipes through the levees that do not have flap valves on the water side, and that you basically, if you're on the water side, the pipe goes through and there's a valve, a flap on it, so the water goes down and it can run out. And some of these just don't have flap valves, so you've got a pipe straight through the levee, so water goes up, water runs out the other side. We have a lot of people who think the levees belong to them. They treat them as such. They cut into the levee. The worst one we had, it was a long time ago, but a guy built a wine cellar in the levee. What do you think? Yeah, right. Yeah, really cool wine. It keeps cool all the time. Those would be examples of those kinds of things.
And I do have another question, Mr. Chairman, but I don't know if you want questions now or later.
Either way.
All right, I'll dig in a little bit more. Clyde, you stated initially that the state has an investment strategy today that is wildly successful, and I think that's a profound statement. Personally, it's nice to hear. There's a lot of good work going on today. Considering that perspective and what is before the Stewardship Council right now, what would you change, or what do you see as being necessary to change? Because I'll back up a little bit. This is my second meeting here this year, so this is a big menu item, and staff and the council have been working on it for a while. I'm trying to gain focus on what it is actually, not only that we've been charged to do, but how we do it. So if I can ask you maybe what you think is missing from your perspective and your role, it might help at least me better refine what I'm supposed to be doing.
When I say that it's wildly successful, it's, when I spent my career working in the legislature. When I first came into the legislature, the levees were falling down, there were all kinds of breaks, long histories. We just don't have that anymore. That's what I mean by wildly successful.
Right.
We have the same thing in the Sacramento Valley with the levee system, with the levees and now the reservoirs, which started to be built after the 1940s or so. We don't have the levee breaks that we had back in 1870 and so on. We're wildly successful, but we have a lot of people moving behind them. So what do I think we need to do? I think some of the things that I mentioned that we need to accomplish, protection of the urban areas is very important. Expansion of the Yola bypass, I mean, all of these things are being worked on. I think if you go down in the Delta, that you've got issues that you could work on. One would be issues like if we have a major levee failure, do we have the capability to respond? We used to have a number of dredge companies. I think we now have one. The department has been squirreling rock away rather than going up. Okay, gee, we need some rock. We need to go to Marysville and have some trucks bring us rock. Well, that isn't going to work. It's in the middle of a flood. They might ever get here. So there's those kinds of things. I think one of the things that we have to do with the Delta is that we need to be flexible on how we respond. The Delta is changing. Whatever we do, I think we shouldn't establish things that are terribly rigid. We ought to be flexible. On the program, on the subvention program, and my board approves the subvention funding, that the department does the work on it. It comes to us once a year. I think that that we ought to take a look at the cost-sharing formula that we have to see whether it can be more effective. We fund operations and maintenance, but the levee districts are proposing to do a lot more, but we don't have enough money. Now, we could either put in more money or we could do it. But I think we ought to look at the cost-sharing formula. I don't think it's been looked at for a long time. And maybe to give you an example of that, if I said to my son, I'm going to give you $10 for every grade you get in school above a B or above, maybe that's not quite the right incentive. Maybe it should be, I'll give you $5 for every B and I'll give you $25 for every A, and maybe I'd get more what I want, and maybe to encourage him. So I think we could look at the cost-sharing formulas, how those kinds of things work.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Eric.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Eric Vink with the Delta Protection Commission. The Delta Protection Commission does not have a direct role in improving levees in the Delta. We don't have funding for levee improvements. We do represent reclamation districts. They're members of our commission. We have local elected officials sitting as commission members for which these issues are critically important. And so levees, levee protection, emergency preparedness and response, these are all very critical issues to the Delta Protection Commission. And our economic sustainability plan was quite detailed on the issue of levees, and it formed the basis for one of the alternatives that Cindy had mentioned earlier. So I don't know that I have much more to add to that in terms of where we would stand. I think our recommendations are incorporated within our economic sustainability plan. My tenure with the Commission has been relatively short, certainly has been since the adoption of that plan. But I've heard no indication that the Commission is looking at a different direction other than what was mentioned in the economic sustainability plan. I do have just a couple of general thoughts to offer here, and these are comments that are heard consistently. I think they're a very clear indication of the message that comes from the Delta in terms of the important task that the Council has in front of them for prioritizing levee improvements. The first is that the levees are a system, and it really would be unwise to starve certain levees of funding or to starve certain levees of funding improvements, whether through the subvention program or in some cases through the special projects program, or frankly any other program that might succeed. Our current system of providing support for Delta levee improvements The failure of one levee can increase the risk of other levee failures. And so this was a message very clearly stated in our plan. The goal should be to achieve a base level of protection throughout the Delta and then build to higher standards in prioritized areas. And I think something worth considering, and forgive me if I'm stating the obvious, but it always seems like, you know, we estimate the cost of doing these improvements and we somehow figure that the work's going to magically occur overnight. There's no way the work could occur overnight even if dollars were not a limiting factor. This is work that will occur over a period of time. It would be great if all these improvements could be made to Delta levees within the span of a generation. Maybe they can, maybe it'll take a little bit longer than a generation. But it's work that will occur over a period of time. The magnitude of the task begins to look a lot less daunting when you consider that, and you don't just think somehow we've got to come up with $4 billion to make all of these fixes within the next year. So again, probably very much stating the obvious, but I think it's worth noting because the price tag associated with this is substantial, but it's also work that will occur over a period of time. Delta levees protect much more than a rural population and agricultural islands. Of course, we're very concerned about those, and we think, you know, protection of life and property must be factored in to this prioritization strategy, even areas that are lightly populated and rural in nature. But it's also true that significant infrastructure, including public infrastructure, such as highways and water transmission facilities, cross through the Delta. And Cindy made reference earlier to our assessment district feasibility study that we hope to be underway on after our next commission meeting in mid-March. But that will be an attempt to draw a finer bead on Delta levee beneficiaries and an attempt to better apportion, costs among beneficiaries for the costs of maintaining the system. We're closely involved with the work that Cindy and Dustin are doing on the levee investment strategy. They will be closely involved with the work that we'll be doing on the assessment district feasibility study. We expect in a few places these two efforts to intersect with each other, and actually there are some shared tasks between the two efforts, so we'll have two good minds working on some of these thorny issues in some of these areas, and we'll continue to be quite involved with the council through their investment strategy effort. And I guess the final thing I wanted to mention is that it was mentioned in the alternative attributed to the economic sustainability plan that it did not factor in setback levies. That is true. There was concern about setback levies, primarily that limited funding for levee improvements would be prioritized for habitat purposes to the detriment of improving deficient levees, and also out of concern that setback levies would eat into the store of agricultural land in the Delta and the basis for the Delta economy. The Commission would recommend that opportunities for waterside habitat improvement in conjunction with levee improvements and in-channel opportunities should be the priority for the habitat improvements that would otherwise be accomplished through setback levies. And I think that's all I wanted to mention at this point. I'd certainly be happy to respond to questions. Improvements and improving the system are important, but we must not forget emergency preparedness and response as well. And you know, this isn't just about ensuring that levees are relatively impervious to failure. We know that regardless of the level of improvement throughout this system, that there will be levee failures that will occur in the future, but we can mitigate a lot of those detrimental impacts through beefing up our emergency preparedness and response activities And I think actually, in exception to what Clyde mentioned earlier, I think the department in particular is doing a very good job about creating stockpiles for materials throughout the Delta, and there are really good plans underway to ensure that there is adequate material stockpiled to address those instances where we do have levee failures in the Delta. Thanks.
Eric, thank you. Gary, welcome.
Commission? Oh, perfect. A little worried there. I was actually kind of struck by some of the comments. I thought I'd maybe leap before I go into what the department does and a little bit of our thoughts on the investment strategy. I had the opportunity probably, I think maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, there was an interview that I was asked to do with NBC over levee safety, and the interview was actually almost an entire hour and continued to hit me on any number of issues, a lot of the things discussed right here in this. But at the very end, I kind of got the zinger question where he says, so are you happy where we're at? And I had my response. I said, I don't think anybody in the industry would say they're happy where we're at, but we're a lot better today than we were 10 years ago. Well, anyway, when this interview took place, my daughter happened to be, was back from college for that weekend and saw the piece. And she's a kind of a pre-law kind of a thing. And when she heard it, she first remark says, what you should have said is, goes, I'm incapable of being happy. So I'm going to have to bring her with me on my next interview. But the fact is, and kind of reinforcing some of the messages, is that whatever we do in the investment in the levees, not only in the Delta, statewide, Central Valley, state plan of flood control, there will be residual risk. There's always going to be that. So it's important to express the aspects of emergency response and other things. So levee investment is very important. We're better than we were. We'll continue to get better, I think, what's reflected. But at the end of the day, there's going to be risk. And we've talked about the nature of the risk. So I thought it's important to maybe just put a little context to this. And I think my daughter put it best in the context of that interview. So with that, I am Gary Bardini. I'm the Deputy Director of the Department of Water Resources. Just quick for the department's role, I'm going to summarize it simply. We do a number of things for statewide infrastructure, both in the construction and O&M and management. State Water Project is one. State Plan of Flood Control, working closely with the board in partnership, is another major part of that statewide infrastructure. Beyond that, we have a significant role in local assistance that we do statewide, and of course we do that in the Delta. And then further, we actually have what I think is probably the most important aspect of our mission is we have a statewide planning responsibility under the California Water Plan, and continue to guide the investments and activities that have been going on in the state, including the Governor's Water Action Plan, which is, I think, the latest of our efforts on the statewide side. Now, specifically related to what I call the public safety flood management side, the department is organized essentially under three major efforts: the state plan of flood control facilities, which are significant in the Central Valley, the aspects of continuing to improve the Delta, and statewide flood management. And we do these through essentially 6 major types of program initiatives. One is related just to the planning effort. Central Valley Flood Plan is one example of that. We've done a number of things in the Delta with the DREAMS work. The second one is continue to do engineering evaluation. We've done a number of that in the Central Valley and statewide. We continue to progress regional projects. We continue to essentially do good and help in the floodplain management, O&M and operations, and then lastly, emergency response. So all of these are done at all those regions, state plan of flood control in the Delta, and then more importantly, just statewide itself. So just a little bit of a thoughts on the investment strategy. I really feel that the good body of work we did in 2011, I think, frames it well. We had a Delta investment strategy framework that was done in 2011. I think it frames it pretty well where the department's perspective is on at least at a broad level on the investment side and priority. I'll just kind of summarize it. It's always been about the aspects of what we call the localized regional portion of the flood protection behind the levee. It's been the channels itself and how they're important in that network. And then, of course, how we handle the ecosystem. Those are generally the framing of how we went about it. Within that, in the localized, we look at the urban areas, 200-year protections. How do we handle small communities? How do we agricultural? Those are important. In the channels itself, how do you maintain water quality, localized and statewide, supply and conveyance, but in the ecosystem within it. And then we went further to talk about the ecosystems in a number of areas, channel itself, wetlands itself, and floodplains. So a number of the things were articulated in the plan, and I think it kind of articulates well where I think the investment strategy that we kind of been framing our implementation, essentially going back to since the 70s and onwards, have been in some manner framed in that. We continue to progress on that, strengthen it up. And where I think today we can say that we're better off than we were 10 years ago or where we were 40 years ago, and I would concur, we are better, but there is going to continue to be risk. Just my last comment, I think, is moving forward and helping. Obviously, the department is going to provide all the support to this effort, and I think in the efforts to date, looking at the alternatives or how do you frame it further, typically this always comes down technically down to a hazard, exposure, vulnerability, and consequence evaluation, and how you make investments to basically try to essentially eventually deal with that risk at the end. So while you look at the different alternatives, hopefully these things will go and meet towards those broader values that you've laid out or outcomes. And eventually, like I said, there'll always be a residual risk out of this, and we have to be careful on that. So those are my quick comments.
Very good. We got Patrick.
Would it be fair to characterize the department's view that it's pursuing levee improvements and added money would allow you to continue what you're already doing, and that's the strategy?
Yeah, and I would say, I think we look at the body of work we've done, particularly under the flood safe work, and it's been in the Delta statewide and in the Central Valley. The amount of investment needed for essentially both the public safety, flood, and ecosystem in the river systems, I would say that we have essentially significant investment needs and revenues that fall short to meeting it broadly across the state. I think the real issue has been how do we prioritize what funding we do and how do you continue to garnish or improve on it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because if you look at the latest bond measure compared to rough estimates of complying with the minimum federal standard for all the levees in the Delta, it's about 10% funding anticipated from the bond to meet the need. So how do you prioritize?
Yeah, what's interesting is we're kind of doing the same thing right now on a statewide basis, and it'll kind of cover the Delta. This is part of our flood futures we did with the Corps of Engineers and about 160 agencies. And I think what it comes down to is you're kind of going through that with some of the alternatives you have, and then I think we've looked at on the statewide. The question is right off the bat, would you just be able to maintain your levees that you currently have to a certain level? Subvention has been a reflection of that commitment towards that, and also the emergency management. And so where it comes down to is that every level of investment that you get or increment, then what's the next type of management action that you want to try to go after? And so we're kind of trying to frame it on a statewide basis, and I think at the end of this evaluation, I think it'll be good to come back and see what different increments might be and how would you put the investment to the management actions in the Delta. So that's kind of my basic thoughts on this.
When you go back to the clubhouse that's DWR, do you really think what the legislature told us to do is kind of a waste of time and overlooks the fact that you're already doing fine, and that the history, as Tom Zuckerman described it, of getting a Bob Potter, who was a great public servant for DWR, together with knowledgeable people in reclamation districts, could figure out how to allocate the money best?
Well, I'm not sure about the clubhouse. I like that. But do I think, at the end of the day, is the improvements in the Delta going to require state support along with significant, local, regional knowledge? Absolutely. I think, again, we've done this in a number of efforts. I think with this effort here, that the Stewardship Council has opportunity is another opportunity to have that conversation on how to do it.
Yeah, but conversation is one of those words that sort of avoids whether or not you're going to set up any standard or rule or priority. So that's what we've been asked to figure out. And you kind of talked about things that you consider, which sounded like what the capacity is of your local partners to do a good project and pay their share. Has to do with the relative risk, urban populations, for instance. Some consideration for the ecosystem, although I'm sure if you had more time, you'd explain what that meant.
Sure.
And then as the manager of the infrastructure of the state water project, that would matter too, right? The channels that move water for uses south of the Delta. But those are all considerations. They're kind of in the pot of things. But if you have $300 million and a $3 billion need, well, what do you do? And what it feels like is you're doing the best you can with the money that's given, and there's a lot that's known, and you go about it professionally to figure it out. What the legislature has in the law says is that we ought to publicly, rationally evaluate what the standards are by which we decide how public monies are used in accordance with a sense of what the state's interests are, not excluding local interests, because the state, of course, covers the locals' interests as well, but how to figure that out is what we're trying to do. And you referenced the DREAM study. You may be the only one who referenced it positively that spoke about it. But the sense that the DREAM study provided good information didn't extend to it providing a roadmap or a standard or something that you could look at to figure out what you might do next. Because I assume if it did, the legislature wouldn't have given the council this job.
Well, just quick, I think the DREAM study did a couple really, on the positive, it really did go further to describe the hazard and in the system, and I think that's an exposure. And I think it gave a part of the, I think, foundational stuff that I think leads to the next question of how do you address the vulnerability and what are the right management actions to address the consequences.
Quick question of staff. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Cindy, the reference Gary made to the Delta Investment Strategy in 2011, how much of the body of work we're looking at includes information from that effort?
Let me get closer here. So we definitely took a good look at that document, especially as we were developing the issue paper, because it did contain a lot of really good background and a sense of how DWR is managing the investments and their priorities. So there's definitely a lot of overlap between those elements. But again, it is broad in nature, and so I think we'll continue to reference back to that as we move through, but that's been the use so far.
And I think the alternative that we've identified as the business as usual alternative, which really is derived from our current interim policy in the Delta Plan, is aligned with the DWR's current Delta Levee investment strategy. Really, the way the current policy was developed was when the council kind of couldn't find a way forward about how to set priorities during the Delta Plan's development. DWR said, well, we have this draft of a levee investment strategy, maybe that'll work. And that was a thing that the council, with some reluctance, and agreed to, but said, well, we're going to get back to this as soon as we can.
Okay. And Gary, more directly, what do you think is missing, and maybe part of Patrick's question, what's missing and where would you like to see us focus if we were able to grant you your wish?
Well, I think where we'd like to see is with the goals and objectives laid out, then what generally on the ground would be the types of management actions that would essentially give you the biggest bang for your buck, essentially. And then at that point, we could start laying out prioritizations in our delivery of different local assistance programs towards that objective. So I think more we could see on the ground what we think are the management actions that could have essentially the, great, public benefit. Then at that point, we can start trying to basically work with local agencies, the federal government, other state agencies, then towards essentially making that become more of a reality through the number of local assistance programs we have. They're just not just the subvention or special projects, there are many others that we have in state government.
And then there's also the revenue piece. More money creates more opportunity.
That's the idea.
Okay, thank you.
All right, anyone else? Gary, thanks. Carl, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Council members. The Department of Fish and Game's role in levies is primarily in the environmental review aspect. We have a program as part of the levy subventions where we have staff that review those projects for their meeting the objectives of the subvention program, which are in the legislation, which require mitigation and enhancement associated with the effects of whatever the subvention project is. So that's our primary role. We also participate in the special projects in a similar way, and also have a permitting role in that levee work, particularly on the outside of the levee, potentially requires a stream bed alteration agreement under the Fish and Game Code Section 1603, and also potentially through the California Endangered Species Act. So actions that affect listed species, something like Swainson's hawk in the Delta, or garter snakes or something like that, would require a permit as part of that process. As part of the subventions program, I got a little information from our staff relative to what has been accomplished from a habitat perspective. And I don't have the time bounds on it, but I think this probably represents the entirety of the program, or at least since the department's been part of it, is that on the mitigation side, there have been 380 acres of wetland mitigation and 12,800 linear feet of shaded riverine habitat. This is streamside vegetation. And on the enhancement side, about 19,000 linear feet of channel margin habitat, or SRA. So, if you add those up, that's maybe 6 miles of channel margin habitat. I think one of the things that has occurred to me as we've gone forward is that we don't necessarily have a really good assessment of the effects of many of the ecosystem actions that have been part of levee projects. And that, there is a science need there to look back at what information has been gained. In 2006, there was a lot of emergency work following the high flow year. Lots of projects put in that were identified, and they were primarily channel side activities that were identified as mitigations or enhancements. And to date, I have never seen any assessment of, on a large scale of what the benefits of those were. Did they provide the intended benefits of providing, large woody debris and refugial cover for outmigrating salmonids? Did they end up providing predator habitat? Many of those, and there are a couple projects here in Walnut Grove, were placing rock in the river and then embedding wood in them. I think most of what we know about what native species like our soft shorelines as opposed to rocky shorelines. So I think that is a definite need as we move forward talking about what the ecosystem side of levees are, and focusing, from the department's perspective, while we're interested in the biological resources of the delta and restoring those habitats, we're particularly interested in the aquatic side and the water side of the levees as far as restoring habitat. Now, the Delta Plan doesn't have any specific objectives, but it has a large objective for a large amount of habitat improvement and or restoration in the next, I guess we're 85 years now. I think the target was 2001. And the department, as the implementer of the Ecosystem Restoration Program from CalFed, along with our federal counterparts, has identified the need for habitat within the Delta. And one of the issues that arises in the context of levee activity and prioritizing goes to the issue of how do you accommodate any habitat if you're going to basically fix things in place. And so from that perspective, I think some of our issues with the way this would move forward is that there needs to be a better consideration of where and how you might do habitat in the context of levee improvements and where you would prioritize those, particularly relative to the economic effects and the other effects on the other issues or risk issues in the Delta. And I'm not going to speak to making those decisions about economic risks or health and safety. Those are all things that have to be addressed and accommodated and are high on the priority level. But as far as moving forward in the context of figuring out how you're going to restore the Delta ecosystem, which is one of the co-equal goals, I think this is a critical factor in how you look at that and where this restoration may take place. We have good and bad examples of what happens when levees flood. And the goodness and the badness are, to some degree, are in the eye of the beholder. I think from a native species perspective, looking at some place like Frank's Tract, that's not our ideal. If you're a bass fisherman, it's a great place. On the other hand, someplace like Liberty Island, which is a flooded island, which really, in effect, didn't have the economic muscle behind it to restore itself, along with Holland Tract, were abandoned and have become, I think, what we view as our ideal for the purposes of restoration as we move forward. And since so much of the Delta is subsided substantially, we have issues about, okay, what happens? But I think as part of the DREAM study, Peter Moyle, who was involved in that, suggested that, we should do an experiment and set up, find an island that could be flooded in a way that we would want it to be flooded, which would probably be more along the lines of Liberty Island than Frank's Tract, because there are hydrodynamic features that contribute to whether it's going to work well or not. Also, so I think some aspect of looking at where habitat could occur in conjunction with the flood control programs, because I think any of these things go hand in hand, and particularly if we're talking about someplace like the South Delta, and improving flood protection down there, there are opportunities to meld flood protection and habitat enhancement. that are akin to what we see in the Yola bypass, which is another place that I would agree with Clyde, provides opportunities to achieve both purposes in a large way, particularly in the context of the Sacramento system. And so from the perspective of, focusing on the riverside, that isn't to mean that we shouldn't be also concerned with the land side and the habitat values that are associated with that. But to some degree, as the agricultural practices in the Delta change, the value as wildlife habitat tends to change with it, and in many cases is not as high, let's say, in grapes as it would be in corn, particularly for waterfowl or cranes or whatever you're concerned about. But at the same time, the economic value of the land theoretically goes up because of the value associated with the crop. So I think, on that side, we're interested in maintaining certain aspects of agriculture in the Delta because they provide fish and wildlife benefits over other types. And that's really annual crops versus perennial crops or permanent. So, I think there's an interest from that perspective, but I think there are also situations where setback levies should be a consideration. Places like Staten Island potentially. That's been looked at previously as part of the North Delta Flood Protection Program, and I think we need to start looking at that. We have opportunities like what you saw today at McCormick-Williamson, and looking for those types of opportunities within the Delta are high priorities for the department, and will be the types of things that we would be looking at as we move forward with our Prop 1 funding program for habitat and water quality. And I think the other component of this is also the idea that we can achieve some water quality benefits through some of our habitat actions, particularly on the water side, and expansion of intertidal habitats in particular. So let's see, do I have anything else here? Nope, I think that's it.
Questions of Carl?
Mr. Chairman, I have a general question that I didn't ask each of the panel members, so I'll ask it. Maybe they can go down the line, and maybe we start with Carl. What do you see as a best approach for the council to consider when setting appropriate levels of levee protection? I know it's sort of a big question, Carl, but I trust you can give me an answer.
I think take this from the perspective of the ability or the feasibility of restoration as opposed to the other factors. So, this would play into the fact that I wouldn't expect that Clarksburg is going to be a place that we're going to look to do habitat, but there are other places where you don't have a wide array of infrastructure, urbanization, relative differences in crop value that may be the places that we want to look to not invest a lot of energy into levee maintenance and prioritize those at a lower level in that they may serve other purposes, particularly from the ecosystem side.
Okay, thank you. Clyde? Or I'm sorry, Gary? No, Gary, you.
That's fine, sure. Okay, well, first of all, when we look at the urban areas, we would say urban, it's 200 years, so we're trying to achieve that in the region. In the Central Valley Flood Plan, we have an aspect of addressing that. It goes into the Delta too. The second part of it has been small communities, and we've kind of stated that we're trying to do any number of localized projects to get to 100-year for those. Rural is kind of varied based on essentially what's the current value you have behind there and how far can you put the improvement. So there's a variation on at least in the Central Valley Flood Plan, and if you get into the Delta, I think similar principles exist on how far you want to go. The third part of the next part though has been that's from an actual localized regional, what we're talking to the investment strategy. If you go to essentially what we call then the levee network, then you have to kind of evaluate that for the value of it as a network and then decide what's the appropriate level of investment that you need for it. And I think so it doesn't really fit so much that you can just come up with a standard. You almost have to, based on, again, that hazard consequence evaluation I was talking about would dictate a management action may be different. So I don't think you can just arbitrarily come up with an artifact that this is what you're going to do by a standard. I think it's going to require an assessment and then a set of management actions that are appropriate.
Thank you. And Eric, you touched on it a little bit in your remarks.
Well, I think Gary's formulation was, there we go. I think Gary's formulation was helpful there. And from the Commission's perspective, I think we're primarily interested with the middle part of that, the communities in the Delta. The urban areas are going to get covered by Senate Bill 5, or at least, that's been determined. Obviously, there needs to be more work done to improve those to that level of protection. But I think we would have the most interest in the Delta communities. They're not urban. They're not, just rural populations that are dispersed throughout some of these islands. And then the second category would be those instances where you have, a rural population that's dispersed throughout an island. But my sense is that those are the two categories that we probably will be focusing on more, mindful that it's a system, and I think still arguing that there is some base level of protection that's appropriate for the system.
Okay, thank you. Clyde?
I tend to think, I think like Gary thinks, that it's going to be hard to come down with a single standard. It's just going to be hard, whether the island is little, the island is big, there's very little value on it, there's lots of value. It's going to be hard to do. I tend to think of this as the incremental pieces that we need or we should try to accomplish over some relatively short time frame. What are the things? If somebody gave us a pile of money, what would we do? It's kind of like I bought a house for my son and his wife, and what are we going to do first? Well, you might go in there and maybe remodel the kitchen, or maybe the electrical panel needs to be. So what are the pieces that we need to improve things over a long period of time? And I think a lot of those are, a lot of those things are underway. But what are those critical elements that improves? And I think one of the things to keep in mind about the whole flood control system, nobody is ever going to fix it and say, well, we're done. That isn't going to happen. It's going to go on and on and on, and there are going to be people, sitting up there 50 years from now asking, what do we do? It's going to go on, and so, every generation has its responsibility. So, sort of like in our little window, given how much money we might get, what can we do to fix? What are our priorities? And I think that's what Gary was saying. What are really your priorities? What do you want to do? Where do you get the best bang for the buck?
Thank you. And I had one last question for Gary, Mr. Chairman, on the dredging. We talked about rock stockpiles being available for emergency preparedness, but there was a comment, I think, by Clyde about having the dredge equipment available. Do we have big dredges available for Jones failure type levee breaks? And if so, how quickly? And If not, what can we do to have them available?
Right. Well, this has been a big effort over the last 8 years, and you're seeing essentially facility improvements made, and I think in a number of locations, the port. One of the things we did was put, rock piles, conveyors, and other stuff, and being able to transport efficiently. The aspects of having dredge or whatever, essentially you're really dependent upon at this point the likes of Dutra and others that are in the industry in there. So essentially what we do is we have emergency management plans about where are the current contractors at, quarries, facilities, so we can actually mobilize our plan. So it's kind of essentially one that has to be almost constantly updated based on where the current private market is in terms of infrastructure, and essentially having our plans being essentially based on their capacity. So obviously if we lost Dutra or some of these other folks or et cetera, we'd have less ability to respond. We've looked as far as though you'd actually have to bring barging and other types of stuff. You may even have to, if we had a major event, very significant, you'd exceed the capacity to California and have to bring it all the way down from Washington or other places. So it just kind of gives you an idea of, depending on the scale of the event.
And I think it's important for us to consider that in the deliberation before us. Okay, thank you. Thank you all.
Phil.
I think this has been one of the better panel discussions we've had in the 5 years that we've been around. I just want to thank you for helping to focus attention. But Cindy, I want to take what the panel said and draw it back to you. And one of the things that I did as they were talking is I keep going back and I read the statute that tells us what we're supposed to do. And more it seems to me, the format you're developing for your report of the background information, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pages, whatever it is. I've always got questions and concerns and suggestions, but the background is important. The range of options is equally useful because, the council is should not try to make it up out of whole cloth, and so I'd urge you to do that.
Okay.
But I wonder whether you don't have to look somewhat differently at state priorities for investment based on the statute. And let me go back to the first thing. The Delta Plan shall attempt to reduce risk to people, property, and state interest in the Delta by promoting effective emergency preparedness, appropriate land uses, and strategic levee investments. Strategic levee investments are tied to the other two. So if in a world you said, we only want to talk about strategic levee investments and we don't want to do any preparedness for emergencies and we don't want to have any land use restrictions because we don't like that. That would imply the state somehow is asked to define and use levees only as the approach to solving the flood threat problem, which is not the law of the state of California, certainly not the directions to us. So one of the things that just occurred to me is if you talk about effective emergency preparedness, we've already said in the Delta Plan, as a recommendation, not a regulation, there should be a Delta-wide levee assessment district controlled by local agencies. And that's all we said, essentially. We didn't say who, what, when, where. I think we made some observations. The counties are likely to be the appropriate sources. We said the CPUC, the Public Utilities Commission, should get off the duff and they should talk to their regulated utilities who have lines going through the Delta, and they should pay a cost of flood protection as part of the process. And there are other things as well. That element it seems to me, has to be part of this report, because when it goes to the governor and the legislature, they have to understand it's part of a linked package of things. And the second is the appropriate land use, and this is where we took some stabs at it. We adopted in the Delta Plan interim rules on land use. We didn't do it as hard as I would have done it, which is say we discourage urbanized development throughout the flood-prone areas. I personally think we should. But at a minimum, we said development should occur only within the boundaries of existing urban limit lines or spheres of influence, and that measure is going to be tested. We know out of San Joaquin County coming up. We know it's coming. Well, it seems to me a levee investment strategy that does not put further nails into that point is not a levy investment strategy at all. I think also, Carl, one of Carl's points on setback levies and the question of how can you design what you need for flood protection in an intelligent way that also serves other purposes might be appropriate land use stuff. It really requires a sophisticated understanding. When you adopt a new floodplain, you expand an existing floodplain, you use setback levies. It's not simply just building fatter, taller levees everywhere in the world and hoping for the best. And that then leads to the investment strategy, and I'm just drawing out of the discussion. For me, I just look at it, and that's where we're supposed to recommend priorities for state investments. But the panel was very helpful on priorities. So Clyde weighed in. He says, urban levies first. Clyde, I'm paraphrasing you. And I suppose he means urban project levies first, although he didn't exactly say it. Because we have a duty in the investment strategy to talk about project and non-project levies. Eric, and I think Clyde also said, well, Public Law 8499 ought to be a value, and many of the local folks have said that's got to be a value in the whole thing. But fundamentally, we've got to pair that up with the co-equal goals of water reliability and ecosystem improvements. And really the question there, more than anything else, is who pays for it? Mm-hmm. And what we haven't talked about is if a project, a levee protection project, serves water reliability purposes, well, it's water reliability for whom? Presumptively, it's a state water contractor's customers. Should they not pay that cost? Now, my experience in the levee debate is everyone's always looking for somebody else to pay the cost because that's just better. But I don't think that works. I think what we're going to wind up with on the investment strategy is water reliability and ecosystem sitting there as the two fundamentals. And we're going to have to say, if that's present and if there's a declaration made, by the way, who should make the declaration? DWR, the state legislature, that a levee improvement serves water reliability or ecosystem. And then you got to say, what is an appropriate cost share, not just state and local, but for water contractors as well. I mean, there is no way out of the fact that a large part of this is just talking about money. I mean, so I'm kind of rambling on, but I think they've helped us improve substantially what your product's going to be coming back to us and how we phrase it and shape it. And I'm not trying to tell you I'm not trying to tell you how to shape your recommendations and your alternatives, but I just think that you've got to throw in the emergency preparedness and the appropriate land use, and you've probably then got to start talking about some of the declarations the panelists made that might serve as examples of approaches. And at some point I want to talk to you about your chart. I've got all kinds of questions, but
okay.
This is a terrific chart for having alternatives.
Oh, okay.
But what the backup memo is going to be is the annotation to explain the terms, which a chart does not. Conveyance corridors is not a term defined anywhere at all. I looked at it and I said, explain. Limited flooded accommodation space greater than is not explained. I'll bet you on alternative 3, the Delta Protection Commission might pause at the implication that they support conveyance. They would probably say fortress might be a better explanation of their position. And conveyance in the other 2 examples, I think you mean improved conveyance, whatever. It's just not clear.
Okay.
Those can be worked out, but I just want to thank the panelists for all of this and say the only thing that's lacking in this is the impact of growth, which we may get to when we get the tolerable risk discussion. But growth drives money decisions, and more importantly, it drives state cost and local cost and the number of people at risk. And I personally think the council ought to take a fairly strong position to discourage that. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Cindy, I want to echo Phil's comments complimenting the panel. This has been very good. And I wanted to highlight a couple of things that Carl mentioned that have been bothering me for some time. One is, if we're going to invest money in levees in support of an ecosystem, it is for a particular purpose to benefit something. And if we don't monitor it adequately, we don't know if we've gotten any benefit out of that or not. And we've not learned anything for the next project that may be attempting to achieve the same goals. So I think our science program should weigh in heavily on the monitoring aspects of levee investments as related to supporting ecosystems. And then the other thing that he touched on that I was reminded of today as we were getting a briefing on the McCormick-Williamson, you can easily spend as much money on a particular island in support of flood protection as you will if you convert that island to tidal habitat. In fact, it looks to me like the McCormick-Williamson investments required to do everything that is needed to do will probably be greater in terms of the levee work than, and cost-wise, than if it were simply just to be for flood protection. So it would be really nice, looking forward, if we could identify where those key environmentally beneficial areas are and avoid, in the case of McCormick-Williamson, building a levee that's adequate for managing flood risks, that instead should be a levee that has a shallow slope on the inboard side to protect wave fetch and those kinds of investments. And I don't know, based on what I have seen of the level of work that's gone into identifying habitat restoration opportunities in the state, how we're ever going to get to a point where we can avoid directing state monies to improve a levee that then will later be reversed because there's been a decision to alter the course of that particular island. I'll just leave that as a question.
Okay.
Any other comments, questions of the panel? I think I'm going to excuse the panel then, and with a great thanks for coming.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Okay, so it's at this point that you have presented everything that you have to present. Yes. So we will now take public comment.
Okay.
And then we will follow that up with Larry's presentation.
Yes, and I'm being mindful of the time. We're supposed to end at 4 today. And Larry's going to need at least, I don't know where Larry is, 15 minutes or so for the presentation. So I just wanted to put that out there. It'll be quite fast.
Did Larry go to the Science as a Messenger workshop and learn how to consolidate his...
Work through his triangle.
Yeah. Okay, we'll try and move through this quickly. Steve Mello, Mello Farms Incorporated. Steve, welcome.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, council, people, give you a little background. I served on Senator Patrick Johnston's Delta Protection Commission for 8 years. I was very involved with the North Delta Program Plan, North Delta Improvement Group, CalFed, et cetera. And, my comments today are extemporaneous. I've not prepared anything, but I am a member of, in addition to running my farming company, I am the president of RD 563. I am on the North Delta Water Agency Board of Directors, and I'm a member of the Board of Directors of the, Central Valley Flood Control Association. In regards to prioritizing which islands get funding, You know, I believe that together we hold, separately we fail singly over time. Really believe that. In regards to the subventions program, the California Delta Levee Subventions Program, it has been very successful. My island, Tyler Island, has increased our safety greatly. I want you to know that it's not a grant program. It's not a gift program. There is a rationale for that program, and that rationale is that public uses of the delta, of the channels, of the levees, result in damage to our levees that we're responsible for fixing. The Tetra Tech report and the USGS report of 1973 and 74, respectively, enumerate the amount of damages done by their respective use. And I would put to you that the people in the Delta, the landowners in the Delta, are not the beneficiaries of the state, we're the benefactors to the state. We pay more than our share. And in regards to what we're protecting, we're not just protecting our private property. We're not protecting our right to farm. We're not protecting our buildings solely. I'm protecting life and property. I am protecting infrastructure of statewide importance. I'm protecting gas fields in a state that has a paucity of fuel, very clean fossil fuel. You know, in the case of Tyler Island, several islands, there are pipelines that take Trans-Canada gas for storage over in Acampo for use later on. So the other thing that we're protecting is very vital habitat for sandhill crane, Swainson's hawk, migratory birds that are protected by international treaty. So that's important as well. The margins of our islands have great value by virtue of the shallow and shaded riverine aquatic habitats that we provide. And through the CalFed process, I actually got some grants then on Tyler Island, Georgiana Slough. This is Georgiana Slough, just right across the levee here. There were monies spent with great results over a period of time. Unfortunately, you know, while the Army Corps of Engineers was a signatory to, participant in, and funder of CalFed, a different arm of the Army Corps of Engineers saw some of those habitats as breaches of the protocols in regards to vegetation maintenance. So our district, at our cost, had to remove some of the very stuff that they planted, which I found sickening. Like I said, these comments are extemporaneous. I just jotted down some stuff here. Oh, in regards to setback levies, you know, I was very involved with the North Delta Program Plan. My island is Tyler Island, right to the west of Staten, where you were earlier. When you start getting into setback levees and you take the levee that is currently there, that is settled over 100 years, well over 100 years, that is on its natural sedimentary foundation, and you move it inland into the island that has higher levels of organic matter, those levees are going to settle for centuries and increase maintenance costs. And I believe that they're not cost beneficial. One of the things through the North Delta Program Plan that we talked about is doing a modified setback levee, where you don't set the levee all the way back, but that you set it back partially, so you're maintaining that footprint on the sedimentary base, and you're increasing the waterside slope of the levee. In regards to the PL 8499, the number of districts that have lost their eligibility is disheartening. But we districts need to spend our money on our most pressing problem. If you think of our levies as a chain, we need to spend our monies, our limited fiscal resources, on the weakest link in that chain. And some of the things that we've been getting knocked over on by the Corps and by DWR, by the Central Valley Flood Control Board, are somewhat cosmetic in nature. And you know, for instance, Tyler Island flooded in 1986 for the first time since 1906. We flooded because not of lack of levee integrity, but because of overtopping due to lack of channel capacity. We have been raising our levees since, and it's not going to happen again on my watch. 87, 88, 89, we got up to HMP standards, hazard mitigation plan standards, a foot above 100-year floodplain. We have since had a couple of big levee projects that raised the levee, broadened the scope, broadened the the crown width. And we now have 2 foot above 100-year flood protection on all but 3 3/4 miles of levee. And before I spend my money polishing one of the strongest links to my chain, I would much rather spend the money strengthening the weakest link. So we districts are trying to be responsible with our limited fiscal resources using the very effective Delta Levee subventions funds.
Steve, that's very, very helpful. Thank you for your
Thank you.
comments.
Thank you all for your time.
Eric Ringelberg, Local Agencies of the North Delta. Welcome, Eric.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and council members. Eric Ringelberg, Local Agency of the North Delta. I think you've heard a lot today and in prior meetings about how the system functions today. I think if you've been working on these public policy issues for decades, you're maybe carrying forward some perceptions that were certainly true at that time, but that have largely been resolved through the current subventions or special programs. The system isn't perfect. The system has, as you heard just a second ago, significant defects. Each island has its own suite of problems. But the existing system isn't broken, and the state has done, particularly DWR's subventions program, a fantastic job of bringing the system into compliance. I think Larry Roth will speak at length as what compliance means, but today within the Delta, PL 8499 is what we consider the most effective standard for non-urban areas. So I wanted to get to one of the councilors' questions here, which is looking at attachment 3, the table, which you pointed out, Member Eisenberg. This table is a good illustration of how we want to work more closely with council staff, because if you look just across the top row, we don't believe that this is a substantive mix of alternatives, and we need a substantive mix of alternatives to provide that roadmap that you were talking about earlier. Things aren't perfect. How can we make things better? How can we get ourselves on a trajectory with limited funding to start resolving these key problems? And these are sticky problems. They're not going to be simple to resolve. But I think looking just simply across the list here, we don't, of course, we've mentioned this before, business as usual, that we don't think business as usual is actually it. We think business as usual or business as usual 2.0 or plus is actually where we are today, because DWR doesn't look at a single issue. DWR looks at multiple environmental factors. Alternative 3, the Delta as fortress, I love that phrase. No one in the Delta believes there's such a thing or there's a possibility of a Delta as a fortress. But if you're going to use that example, then we want the reduced export element of the Delta fortress. And then finally, alternative 4, the goal-oriented prudence approach. That seems like a polemic description to me. They should all be prudent. They should all be reasonable. And that gets to one of my questions here in terms of we don't seem to have a great enough span of alternatives. The alternatives themselves seem to be relatively simplistic and not likely to achieve that roadmap that we're looking for. And then within the alternatives, there's not really much of a span. If you look through this table, and I understand it is a first cut, there's very little difference between alternatives. That's not going to help inform our decision making. That's not a way to develop the sideboards for more effective decision making. And I don't think we're there. And in particular, it was greatly concerning to me on the second page where we have the Delta place goals, and one of the examples, alternative 4, not considered under this alternative. I'm not an attorney, but I don't think that we can dispense with the statutory requirements for these alternatives. Maybe make one as a straw man for that. But I think the council has a list of statutory requirements. How to balance those requirements, the depth of those requirements, those are the questions we really should be asking in this kind of document. The span should be between, let me use as an illustration here, ecosystem restoration goals. So I see aquatic restoration goals here. I don't see any terrestrial restoration goals. How you weight them, I think, is one of the charges in front of the panel, in front of the technical panel, the expert panel, and then ultimately in front of you. But we should at least see a real range of alternatives. And so finally, I'll wrap up briefly. We would be more than happy to sit down, as I've requested in the past, with staff to help flesh out what our considerations are with this. The goal is we don't think the system is broken, but if we're going to head down this path, we want to come up with at least some alternatives that we feel that we could stand behind. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Next up, Tom Zuckerman, Central Delta Water Agency.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have perhaps taken too much of your time already on this subject, but I did want to respond to a couple of things that occurred to me during the presentations today that may be missing. One of the problems that we need to think about is having an industry, if you will, or a group of people or a group of machines, the knowledge and so forth on a constant basis in the Delta to work on our levees. And that has become a real problem. We've lost almost all the dredgers. And the reason we've lost them is because there isn't any work for them to do, because nobody can do any work in the waterways anymore because they can't get permits. That's a big problem. One of the things that we noticed when we started doing the work for the East Bay Mud Aqueduct projects on those islands across the southern Delta is a resurgence of contractors in the field that were coming out of the woodwork to do the kind of work that now is being done in great abundance. And a consequence of that was the unit costs went down very noticeably. So as we're doing this planning for the future, we need to think about doing it on a regular enough basis so that we can take advantage of having competitive forces within the situation, and also building up our capability to respond to emergencies when they occur. If we were to have an emergency today and one of these earthquakes and 2 or 3 islands flooded at once, the available equipment would go probably to the urban levee, and there wouldn't be the capability, the barges, the dredgers, whatever it would be necessary, because we've gotten out of the business of building levees in that fashion in the Delta. The other thing I wanted to mention to you is that as a context, kind of a consideration. If you look just at the Delta levee program and try to impose all of the dual goals, the this and that and everything on it, it begins to get a little bit awkward. I'm a part of an effort in several different forums at the moment, which is pretty much underneath the radar, but you've seen parts of it, the near-term projects coalition, the this and the that. But there are active discussions going on now of interests across the state, pretty much outside of the governmental spectrum, but talking about sub-regional approaches to the Delta, looking at the corridors where they come into the Delta, the San Joaquin River corridor, taking the lead from your Delta plan with the suggestions about the Paradise Cut deal. Also one on the McCollum-Consumnes corridor, one on the Sacramento focusing on not only the Sacramento but the Cache Slough complex and the Yolo bypass and so forth. But what's interesting about those are all multi-dimensional discussions. They're not coming in and saying, you know, let's do a flood program here, let's do a habitat program, let's do a water quality or water conveyance program. They're looking at it from all three and then looking at the local economic consequences of the thing as well, and trying to develop local consensus around these projects. They may not be grand, huge, but they'll be scalable. And we'll try to get something on the ground with consensus and try to access some of the funding from Prop 1 or wherever else it may come from, not just from the levee program, not just from the environmental program, not just from the water quality program, but accessing all of those different buckets, if you will, to do projects in these areas that will bring multiple benefits to the system. And I wanted you to be aware of that. I think you're going to be hearing a lot more of it if you haven't already as time goes on. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Next up, Emily Papalardo. Did I get that right?
Yes, you did.
Excellent. Well, better to be lucky than good. DCC Engineering.
Hi, my name is Emily Papalardo, and I'm working for DCC Engineering. We do the district engineers for the Brandon Andrus, Staten, and RD 554, where we are now. I think my comments basically were covered by Mr. Vink, Mr. Mello, and Mr. Engelberg. So just to reinforce what they said, I think we should look at these islands as a system of levees where you have your weakest link, and that determines your risk. So pretty much, I mean, because on Brandon Andrus Island, we are already putting monies towards our beefiest levee on the Sacramento River. But if you looked at the 1972 flood, it was the levee along 7 Mile Slough that ended up failing and flooding the entire island. So I think that's where you have to look in terms of levee investment, is the entire island. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. And last blue slip I have is from Gilbert Casio.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman and Council. Gilbert Cosio, MBK Engineers. And I'm not going to talk positively about dreams if you're worried about that. I'm not going to talk negatively either, but it was interesting to hear about dreams because I remember Dr. Moyle, when he was really getting frustrated with what was going on, he actually left. I mean, he and Wim Kimmer actually just left the program. They said, you know, the steering committee has a steering wheel that has no connection to the wheels, and so we're just not going to do it anymore. And that's the way Tom Zuckerman and I felt kind of throughout the whole process, but we stuck around. I just wanted to let you know, I got here a little bit late, so I didn't hear all the staff presentation, but from the questions that came up, it seems like you're looking for more information on the money that's been spent on levees over the years, how it's been used, what the focus is, and that data's out there. Why it didn't get compiled, I don't know, but you know, when we first started the program, I heard you guys talking about the Bob Potter discussions. You know, half the money went to the levees that were important to DWR. So for about the first 20 years, the 8 Western Islands got priority over half the money. And so you can actually break out all that special project money and find out what the focus was at the time. Since Prop 84 and Prop 1E came in, DWR has been very transparent in requesting proposals focused on certain things, habitat enhancement or Old Middle River Corridor, that sort of thing. So if your staff wants to look into it some more, you can probably get more information on how that money was spent and the benefits that we gained. You know, it's hard because you guys have a tough situation. We've got $295 million in Prop 1, and we know that money can be spent in the Delta, in the legal Delta, by the urban agencies. There's no doubt. So risk analysis just doesn't work. I mean, if you want to keep the Delta in the current state or some sort of Delta as place, you're going to have to flip that risk analysis on its head and try to figure out how do you guys categorize your money for Delta as place versus, you know, more bang for the buck. And speaking of more bang for the buck, you know, Tom mentioned that we've gotten these unit prices very, very low on our projects, and we've worked at it over the years because the cost share partner on these projects are the farmers. And these guys don't like to spend money if it doesn't have to do with farming. And so we've gotten really good at putting together plans and specifications that really alleviate any questions to the contractors. That's why we get such low bids. And then also the money that the districts get from the state and their own money, a huge percentage of that goes to actual dirt on the ground. Contrary to some of the EIP projects that have recently been completed under Prop 1E, which have 40 or 50% non-construction projects. That's engineering and biological and legal and all the other costs that go along with it. Ours are generally 10 to 15% of a project cost is non-construction. So we're real efficient at getting that money and putting it right into dirt on the ground. And the last thing I wanted to mention, and when you start looking at what we've done over the last 30 or so years with the Delta Levees program, is what disasters haven't occurred. Because if you actually look at what these levees look like in 1984 when I started and what they look like now, I can tell you the ones that we've worked for, Twitchell wouldn't be there, Webb Tract, Holland Tract, Bolton Island, Bradford Island, and so you'd have a gigantic hole already existing just from the high tides we've gotten in 95, 97, 98, and 2006. So there's a lot of avoidance that you haven't looked at that, sure, it doesn't look like we've got a huge risk reduction by investing in these levees now, but what we've done so far has been pretty good at alleviating a lot of risk to the State Water Project and others that benefit from those levies that have received the money. Thank you.
Pat, let the record show that we also have a written comments from the Friends of the Sacramento River Parkway in regards to this file item in support of completing the Sacramento River Parkway and associated bike paths and so on. I think that's it for public comment. Thank you all. And now, Larry, I sense you're feeling a lot of pressure to present this information in a timely manner.
Could I, if I might, though, before we turn this over to Larry, I wonder if there's any further guidance the council would like to give us sort of in conclusion as we think forward to the March meeting.
Yes. Thanks, Dan.
Dan, I will comment on that, waiting for the chairman to return to his seat. I'd like to see more of the emergency preparedness piece, particularly the dredging equipment, the emergency rock piles, and understand what the system contains today. And it may be wonderful, but I think there's some disparate information out there regarding that, and maybe even some conflict on the information. I also would like to request, respectfully, for whatever reason, if the meeting hasn't occurred, I guess it doesn't really matter, but certainly request, Cindy, that you meet with the North Delta folks. I don't know that I need to ask that, but if Eric is saying there's been a request for a meeting and it hasn't happened, I think we need to be meeting with everybody. So if I need to make that request, I would like to make that request officially.
Okay.
And I'd like to understand more, Dan, about the request, and it's one I agree and support, about putting resources into the weakest link in the chain of the Delta Islands. And for me, it makes complete logical sense, common sense, and practical sense. And maybe somehow, Cindy, you can wrap that into your next presentation.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Go, Larry.
Good afternoon, council members. My name is Larry Roth. I'm with Arcadis. We're the consultant working with the Delta Stewardship Council on the Delta Levees Investment Strategy. I want to thank you for the opportunity to be here today. I'm sorry that we're maybe pressed for time, and perhaps I'll use this opportunity to plant a few seeds, and maybe we can continue this discussion. I found the panel discussion, like the panel members or the council members have said, to be very interesting and very informative. And I'd like to build just a moment on what Council Member Pifo asked. What is the appropriate level of protection? And I'm going to present to you today that I don't think that's the right question to ask. We should be looking at what is the risk level that we can tolerate in the Delta, but in any particular endeavor, particularly an endeavor that involves public works. So today we're going to talk about appropriate levels of protection, but more properly tolerable risk. I'd like to first talk about briefly a study that the American Society of Civil Engineers did immediately after Katrina. They took a look at infrastructure failures of many kinds, starting with Teton Dam and working up through the I-35 bridge collapse in Minneapolis, some of the problems that they had with the Big Dig, and of course Katrina. And they found that there was a consistent set of themes, and that for infrastructure, critical infrastructure to be successful, there are a number of guidelines that ought to be followed. The overarching guideline is that critical infrastructures must hold paramount the safety, health, and welfare of the public that it serves. So I think it's really important in the context of the Delta to recognize that the levees, above all else, protect life safety. But they also found that for critical infrastructure to succeed, you needed to be able to exercise sound leadership, use a systems approach, adapt to change, and be able to manage risk. And today I'd like to emphasize that management of risk, it's not only management, it's understanding risk and being able to effectively communicate it. So that's the title or the topic, topics of discussion for today. Our objective is how do we manage that risk? And I'm going to suggest that we can do that by basing decisions on a risk-informed analysis. And this risk-informed analysis can be used with state interests to arrive at appropriate decisions within the Delta. This risk-informed analysis will also enable us to evaluate investments that we can make to reduce those risks. So today, we're going to talk about tolerable risk. What is it? We're going to look at some of the existing guidance, and we're going to talk briefly about risk-informed mapping, and then I'm going to end up with what are called FN curves. So risk, very simply, is the product of probability times consequences. And the cartoon on that slide indicates that we need to have an understanding of what the hazards are and how likely they may occur. What is the infrastructure that is protecting us, and how will it perform in the face of those hazards? And then who and what is in harm's way. So recognize that risk is probability times consequences. And like Gary Bardini's comments, we recognize that no matter what we do, we'll never be able to eliminate risk entirely. There's always residual risk. But to Council Members Eisenberg's comments earlier, here's a stair step of risk reduction factors that was produced by General Riley of the Corps of Engineers. They include zoning, building codes, communication, and so on, but I have highlighted two areas that are important to today's discussion. First is that levees and flood walls are an element of risk reduction, but we will always live with some residual risk. We talked a little bit in other sessions today about what standards do we have, and I would point out that really HMP and PL 8499 are either insurance, replacement, or disaster rehabilitation types of guidelines. We also have levee design standards. We have 1 in 100 year standards from primarily from FEMA, and then as Gary Bardini mentioned, 1 in 200 year for urbanized areas within California. I'd like to point out though that none of those particular standards recognize that there's residual risk that occurs from one thing, just larger floods, and none of these are safety standards. So why then should we not, or should we avoid using appropriate levels of protection? Well, I think part of the question today was, how are you going to define appropriate? What's appropriate for me may not be appropriate for another person. It also implies that risk can be eliminated. And if you look at the standards, what they're really focused on, those previous standards of HMP and PL 8499, they're basically geometric standards. They're how the levee is shaped. They're not at all about how the levee will perform. And that's an important element that needs to be considered. So this concept of tolerable risk recognizes really a global shift in change of attitudes as we move from the concept of flood control to a concept of flood risk management. And I think it goes without saying that here in the Delta, the challenge really is that we have too many miles with not enough funding. So what is tolerable risk? Well, it's very simply defined as the level of risk that people are willing to live with in order to secure certain benefits. And it's not a binary type of situation. It's a sliding scale. Certainly at one end of the scale, some risks are always going to be considered unacceptable. At the other end of the scale, the risks are going to be considered perhaps broadly acceptable. And then we have the sweet spot in between that range of tolerable risk, and that's what we're aiming for. But I would emphasize that this definition cannot be applied without adult supervision. And I use as an analogy the seatbelt laws that we have throughout the country. We know from years and years of studies that wearing seatbelts reduces traffic fatalities, yet Some people refuse to wear seat belts. And so we have guidance. We have laws that say you have to buckle up. Tolerable risk is based on that concept that absolute protection is not possible. So it involves a comprehensive look at both the probabilities that an event may occur and, if it occurs, what the consequences of that event might be. This informs decisions for us about how we might go about reducing that risk. It can help in setting policies and in making decisions. It allows us to evaluate trade-offs. For example, we can evaluate structural versus non-structural solutions and see what's the cost effectiveness, the efficiency of buying down risk from different types of solutions. It's also useful, very useful in allocation of scarce resources. And it has the advantages that it provides clarity, it's transparent, it's very efficient, and it's consistent from application to application. There are some certain principles of tolerable risk that we need to understand. First, it's based on the premise that risk cannot be ignored. We just can't simply look the other way. It's also based on the premise that absolute safety cannot be guaranteed. More importantly, perhaps, it's based on equity. Equity says that every person is entitled to be protected to the same level of protection. And it's based on efficiency, and that's really a cost effectiveness. Sure.
On the mic, thank you. The right to be protected, what the hell does that mean?
The right to be the same levels of protection that we, I suppose in one example of it is simply social justice, that everybody that lives within a particular floodplain has enjoys the same rights of being protected.
I mean, this is a principle, right? This was the civil engineer's principle as applied, right?
Well, I'm not sure this is a civil engineering principle. This is really the whole thing of tolerable risk stems from occupational safety and hazards.
Let's see, did our lawyer leave? Mr. Stevens, there. Mr. Stevens, where in the Constitution of the State of California does it say the right to be protected is a right of all citizens or people in California? Well, no. The thing, Larry, the thing is, I like the method. I like this approach and characterization, but you have built into it your policy preferences, hiding them as something else. And the problem is this: if we read it this way, it would say, in a territory of 500 square miles, there are 4,000 people. 3,998 of them live in one tiny little corner up here, and 2 people are scattered around in the rest of it. This principle would arguably suggest that every single person, regardless of location in which they put themselves, are equally entitled to protection.
I think that's an oversimplification, and perhaps I misstated it.
Okay.
What it means is that, in a specific example in California, is that if you say there's 200-year level of protection, in this case an appropriate level of protection for urban standards, that means that applies to all urban areas within California. It doesn't mean we're going to achieve them all tomorrow, but it applies to all urban areas, and some urban areas are not going to be more equal than others. That's all it implies.
Well, many urban areas are not within a floodplain, right? Okay, so
we have to be comparing apples and apples here.
Okay, all right. I'll come back to that.
All right. The tolerable risk also requires us to look at both individual risks and societal risks. And so specific to the Delta, individual risk would be life and property of Delta residents, and the societal risk may be the significance of the Delta as a water conveyance corridor for people that depend on the delta as a source of their water. It's also, if once the tolerable risk approach is established, it's able to be continuously reviewed and then updated as risks change due to changes in the future, such as changing conditions from climate change. The goal is to reduce risk to as low as reasonably practicable, and you'll see this ALARP as low as reasonably practicable in tolerable risk discussions. We believe it's a prudent approach to what the code has indicated the Stewardship Council needs to do in the levee investment strategy, which is to reduce flood risk and to enable prioritizing state investments in levee operations, maintenance, and improvements. It also then is a basis on which enables prioritization. What this concept of tolerable risk leads to is shown here as an example from the Netherlands, and this speaks directly, Councilmember Eisenberg, to the equity that everybody in the Netherlands is entitled to a certain, if we're providing protection, then that protection needs to be somewhat equitable throughout the entire country. And everyone is, their new standards are based on everyone having the same level of risk in the Netherlands to the potential for a fatality from a flood-related event. So this is an example of risk mapping that's used in the Netherlands. It's also being used in Japan, Australia, the United Kingdom, a number of other places. We're proposing that we can also identify these kinds of risk maps using the tolerable risk approach for the Delta, and through the Delta Levees Investment Strategy Project, we will be able to very soon produce maps for the Delta that characterize risk to life loss, and you can think of these as layers of a map or map layers. We can characterize the risk of life loss, the risk of flood damage to property, the risk to water supply disruption, the risk to ecosystem, the risk to agricultural assets, and then using the planning tool that's being developed as part of this project as well, depending on how you want to weight those various risks, how the user wants to weight those various risks, you can develop an aggregate risk map for the Delta. And I would also quickly point out that using this layered approach, you also be able to take into consideration system-wide features such as transportation networks and show how those networks are affected or how they compare to various risk layers. You'll be able to look at evacuation routes. You'll be able to look at cultural assets within the Delta. So there's a number of visual ways that we'll be able to describe risk throughout the Delta using this. Another way of showing risk, demonstrating risk, are with what are called FN curves. The y-axis, the vertical axis, is the frequency of some sort of event, flooding, an earthquake, some sort of adverse event. Towards the top, if you can read it, it says 10 to the minus 2. That would correspond basically to a 1 in 100 year type of event. The frequency gets much less frequent the further down you go, so that when you get to the bottom on the vertical axis, you're looking at events that might happen once every million years or so. Along the x-axis, the horizontal axis, you plot the number of fatalities in this particular case, but you can also develop FN curves that look at expected annual damages from flooding, and we'll be able to look at the other factors that we're measuring as well, including the water supply disruption, ecosystem, and so on. If you look at the curve, if something has a fairly low probability of occurring and has dire consequences, could kill a lot of people, it's generally going to plot towards the right and towards the upper part, and you might judge that that's not particularly good. On the other hand, if it plots towards the lower left, where it's either infrequent or it doesn't threaten very many people, then it's probably okay. And the middle zone is that area where you're beginning to borderline what tolerable risk might be. The diagonal line that's shown on that particular drawing is identified as guidance by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation, is what they actually use for dams in the U.S., and that provides, that's the guidance that they use to break the graph or the chart essentially into two pieces. The Corps is considering use of this. It's in their draft policy for levees, but I would suggest that it would be something for us to consider in the Delta, regardless of whether the Corps adopts it or not, because in fact, the Delta levees are dams. They have water against their side slopes 24/7, 365, and so they're really more like dams than they are like levees that are normally only periodically have water against them. And just to illustrate how FN curves show information, we've plotted a couple of different examples. You can see at the very bottom, this is the general kind of expectation we as a society would have about commercial aviation, that the frequency of disasters would be minimal, and that when they occur, the amount of life loss would also be minimal. You can see just above commercial aviation, we have the general area that is normally expected for dams. And one of the things that's important to note there, that it's generally aligned with events of relatively low probability, 1 in 10,000 to 1 in a million type of considerations. You can't really quite see, but in the middle, we've plotted where farm accidents might occur. That's somewhat notional. It's a little hard to translate numbers back and forth, but it's generally about where farm accidents might occur, and you can see merchant shipping. You can also see very prominently where Katrina plotted on this particular chart. And let me just use that as a quick example. This is how you can look at ways to buy down risk. So if you were a resident of New Orleans and you wanted to buy down your risk, there's a couple of different ways you can go. You can try and move that oval, that circle, vertically downward. And to do that, you're reducing the frequency of an event, or you're probably building taller levees, stronger levees. On the other hand, you could move it to the left, and you're going to try and eliminate or reduce the number of people that might be exposed to potentially being killed in a disaster. You can do that by better evacuation. So this is a very powerful planning tool to show graphically what you need to do to be able to move from an area that's probably not so good to an area that's probably okay. And this is in fact what we're showing. This is the results of so far. We've done about half to 2/3 of the Delta Islands. They generally fall in that yellow shaded area, and notionally we're showing that if they're above that diagonal line, that's probably falls into an area where there's justification for taking expedited action to fix stuff. And on the other hand, if they fall below that line, it's islands where action is probably less urgent. And this is for fatalities, but we'll also be drawing the same kind of charts for expected annual damages from flooding, water supply disruption, ecosystem effects, and the effects on agricultural assets. And then, of course, we'll also be able to look at the aggregate, or the aggregate of those risks, depending on how you want to weight those various factors. So let me just conclude by, again, emphasizing some of the advantages of taking this tolerable risk approach, or some of the things that we ought to recognize. First, that absolute protection is not possible. We're only striving to reduce residual risk to what we judge is tolerable. It reduces, it gives us a means to be able to look at what kind of prudent investments can we make to reduce those risks, and it then provides guidance in decision making for the level of risk that we might want to reduce in relationship to what we have judged to be a tolerable risk. It allows us to evaluate cost effectiveness of potential solutions. It is a way, if there's some basic understanding of the concepts, to be able to communicate risk and risk reduction very clearly. And it allows us to open the suite of risk reduction options so that we can compare favorably risk reduction options such as evacuation or land use zoning versus building taller and stronger levees. So I'm sorry I had to rush through that so quickly, and I'm sorry to have taken more time, but I appreciate the time that you've given me.
We thank you for the presentation, Larry. Any questions or comments? All right, thank you. Cindy?
Okay.
Where do we go from here?
Why don't we do a quick recap and a very quick next steps?
Okay.
And that would be it for today. So from my copious notes that I've been taking, this is what I think, and I would propose we'll come back to the council with. So background information, it seems like everybody likes that. We'll come back, we'll build on the expenditures information to start to look at a fuller picture of state dollars invested in project, non-project levies. This will expand out to the Central Valley as well, so we can have discussion around that fuller picture. Expenditures, we will bring back more information on emergency preparedness and response activities in the Delta, and in fact that should get woven into a new suite of alternatives, but we'll kind of break it into both pieces so we can provide some just information. We'll try to capture and bring back key elements of this discussion around the levies as a system and the weakest link. I might need to pick your brain a little bit more, Councilmember PFO, to make sure we're touching on the right points with that. But I know who back here I need to talk to, and I just want to make sure we get the questions answered. And then what we'll do in March is bring back the next version of these alternatives. We'll have maybe a glossary or at least explanations of the terms we're using in the memo. And we'll incorporate key points that we heard from the panel members today, especially the ones I heard echoed by the council members or highlighted by the council members. And we'll also incorporate more elements that Councilmember Eisenberg mentioned from the legislation, from the Delta Plan, and in fact, elements that we've already been thinking about as part of the levy investment strategy, but clearly we haven't brought those into the mix. So the ideas of beneficiary pays, cost allocation, the emergency preparedness and response activities. So where there are elements already laid out in the plan, we'll try to bring those into the mix as well. And we will work with some of our partners. I'll talk to Eric Ringelberg after this meeting to set up a time to talk with him and get his ideas and work with them on maybe a different alternative that gets brought in with the next suite in March. And then for future contract-related reports, we'll make sure that we put total dollars and dollar amounts into those reports. So that's, unless I've missed anything, I'm happy to jot that down.
Anyone want to add anything to that list?
Well, I think the thing to recall is sort of where we're at in the process and what we're hoping to get guidance from y'all on in March. Because what we're trying to do now is we're working with Arcadis is make sure we understand what are the the factors that we think, that you think it's most important we be able to evaluate as we move forward. So that's why we've tried to talk about, well, what are the state's interests in the Delta levee system? Because if there's things that you think are really important that we're not talking about in these alternatives, it's important for us to know it. So that's like the emphasis on emergency preparedness and sort of the scale of our ability to respond to a disaster are important. Because that will help us then, working with Arcadis, to make sure we're thinking about this risk reduction approach in a way that does exactly what we're hearing the local RDs that Mr. Mello works with or others work with do on their individual islands. What's the weakest link? And it's really the weakest link that is related to the most damage. And we want to make sure we're thinking about what are the damages that you're most worried about, so we can do this evaluation in a way that we don't have to, we're thinking of what's important to you. So we don't have to find out in October, whoops, we left something out, we got to back up and start over. So that's where we're headed, you know, and some of this material, I know the workload that Cindy and Dustin have got, so some of this may be ready at the next meeting, and some may take a little longer, but the real guidance we need from y'all in March is, are we thinking of the right sideboards, the right issues to evaluate as we move ahead with the development of our evaluation system? Because then we're going to be, you know, in mid-April, we've got to pass this on to the peer review, and so we want to make sure we've got the right factors, you know, on the table for our consideration and as we wrap that thing up.
Yep. Thanks, Dan. And then,
if I could add
okay.
in there through the chair, Dan, to your point about the weakest link, at least my interest in pursuing that, the weakest link could have, with a levee break failure, could have the least amount of damage from a cost value perspective, or it could have the greatest. So to me, they're two different things. It's not only identifying the link, but identifying the risk behind the weakest link, if that makes sense. So
Yeah.
I don't,
That's
just to
exactly
be
where
clear.
Larry's going,
Yeah, okay, thank you.
All right. Any public comment for file item number 8? Any public comment for anything in general? Yes.
Again, I'm Steve Mello. I'd like to point out that when we districts raise our assessment base by creating a new role, we have to identify all beneficiaries in complying with Proposition 218. And some of the biggest problems we have are with government entities not paying us. And it's not worth enough to sue them to get the money because it's not cost beneficial. I've been trying to get the Central Valley Flood Control Association to deal with it, but for instance, Sacramento County hasn't paid our assessment on their roads for 3 years running. So that's a problem.
Okay.
Thank you.
Duly noted. With that, I'm going to consider the meeting over. Thank you to the audience.
Yeah, so next steps.
Yeah.
So because we're leading towards our March meeting where we want to bring you interests. You know,
Sorry, Chair.
But there's an interim step that we've got planned on March 11th in response to the council's request for some conversation with experts. You want to talk briefly about that?
just very quickly, because I've been getting a lot of questions about this most
The
recently.
March 11th
The
meeting.
March 11th workshop. So on March 11th, we're doing a half-day workshop, 10 to 2, in our building, 989th Street, to answer some of those questions. And what the purpose of this workshop is to bring in some additional technical experts. And these folks are mostly from outside of the region, and we've listed their names, and we'll get you some bios of these folks. But the purpose is to have additional discussion around risk management, levies, state investment strategies, liability, with folks that come from these areas, subject areas, who can bring in knowledge from lessons learned from other areas within the country. So they've got experience with Katrina and Sandy and in general other areas of the country that have experienced big disasters and have implemented some pretty good risk management strategies. And part of the thinking here is this discussion might be a little less technical in some ways, a little broader, but it will, I think, allow us to entertain some additional thoughts that we can put into the alternatives. ways of thinking about the goals, the objectives, and investment strategy. So it's another layer or level of discussion that we wanted to bring to the council. It is public. We'll have public comment session at the end. So, of course, everyone is invited to that. The notice will go up tomorrow if it isn't already up on our website. We do have a couple folks coming from more local, with local expertise. We have a representative from the Army Corps, Sacramento District, and then Dr. Jeff Mount from PPIC will also be joining us for that workshop. So I just wanted to throw that out there. And again, it's to add to this whole list of information and thoughts for us to consider. So.
Very good. So we'll be meeting again in 2 weeks. And Mary, you have a request?
I do, Mr. Chairman. A quick request under item 10 of our agenda, and it's to come back in the future, whether it's April or May. That's fine. If you need more time, I'd like to know when I could expect it. But I'd like a list of restoration projects in the Delta. I think both public and private. I think it'd be helpful and valuable to understand the context, the time frame of the restoration projects, maybe from acquisition to current outcomes, cost, maybe current cost, expected total cost, permitting requirements, adaptive management practices, expectations going in and lessons learned coming out. And we did hear some of that earlier this morning on our field trip to the Cosumnes Preserve, that things today are not as what they expected going in, and that's part of the adaptive management process, and it'd be great to be able to better understand it. So I know this is maybe a big request, so I don't want to put an immediate time frame to it, but I think in the context of habitat restoration and all that we're hearing about and trying to work on, that this might be good to have a report on the projects that are existing in the Delta, but again, both public and private, their time frame. Dutch Slough, I commented on a few days ago, is another one, and I'm sure there are plenty more, but I think personally it would be helpful to me.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Anything else?
No.
That's it? Meeting adjourned. Thank you all for coming.